Hello everyone, I am your storyteller. I truly appreciate your time and support. I hope this story will sink deep into your mind and stay with you for a long time. I know many of you are looking for peace and rest in this video, but before you begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot to me, and now, relax, take a deep breath and prepare to enter a night unlike any other. The first night I stayed in the Victorian-era room in Cardiff, I convinced myself that it was nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. A soft clink from the coffee cup on the desk, a faint creaking sound from somewhere beyond the wall, just the harmless echoes of an old house, nothing more. I told myself it was normal, just the byproduct of jet lag and an overactive imagination. But by the third night, denial was no longer an option. With each hollow tick from the towering, ornate wall clock in the corner, beautiful, yet cold, objects in the room began to shift. Not in random shudders or trembles, but with a precision that was almost surgical. As if an invisible hand was adjusting them, deliberate, exact, and synchronized with the endless, hypnotic sway of the brass pendulum. I had come to Wales as part of a linguistic exchange program, eager to immerse myself in the forgotten whispers of ancient dialects and explore a culture steeped in legends and hidden histories. Finding this room felt like a stroke of luck, a spacious second-floor bedroom in a Victorian townhouse, just a short walk from Cardiff University. Mrs. Pritchard, the elderly landlady, was the one who showed me the room. There was something off about her from the start, a strange hesitation in her voice, a flicker of unease in her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed me the heavy iron key, like she was passing on more than just a rental agreement. She muttered something under her breath. "This room, it has habits of its own." When I pressed her for details, she waved it off with a vague smile and quickly changed the subject. But as she shuffled away down the dark corridor, she stopped one last time, glanced back, and said, "Mind the clock. It gives advice in its own way." The room itself was captivating, timeless in its design. The high ceiling seemed to stretch into shadow, while a large window overlooked a secluded courtyard garden where ivy curled along ancient brick. Heavy oak furniture, intricately carved, stood like sentinels, each piece worn by the weight of generations, each scratch a whisper from the past. But above all, there was the clock. An enormous mahogany structure that nearly brushed the ceiling, adorned with intricate brass fittings that caught the dim light in strange ways. Its pendulum, thick and golden, swung with a rhythm that was unervingly deliberate, slow, cautious, and utterly alien. It didn't just mark time. It commanded it. The clock face had no numbers. In their place were strange glyphs, a tangled network of Celtic knots intertwined with mathematical symbols, all of them pulsing with an uncanny rhythm, as if the symbols themselves were alive and breathing. At first, I assumed it was just an eccentric artistic choice, a craftsman's personal touch lost to history. Until I realized something unsettling: the clock kept perfect time. Not fast, not slow. Not even once did it fall out of sync. But the time it kept felt like it didn't quite belong to this world. On the third night, I woke abruptly at exactly 3:17 a.m. A cold unease gripped me as the moonlight spilled unevenly through the window, casting ghostly shapes on the walls. My books, laptop, even the water glass, all had shifted several inches from where I had carefully placed them. They weren't toppled or carelessly knocked over, but deliberately repositioned, as if arranged by meticulous fingers invisible to the eye. Frozen, I watched the pendulum swing back and forth. With every deliberate tick, the object slid imperceptibly, inching across the surfaces in perfect sync. By dawn, my coffee mug had traveled nearly 8 inches across the desk, as if propelled by a secret force. When I confronted Mrs. Pritchard over breakfast, her response was frustratingly vague, a dismissive shrug and a tired claim that old houses settle in strange ways. When I described the uncanny synchronization with the clock's movements, her pale face tightened. Muttering something about previous tenants' overactive imaginations, she excused herself abruptly, leaving an ominous silence in her wake. Desperate, I scoured the university library for any mention of chronological displacement, temporal anomalies, or haunted Welsh architecture. The archives were silent. My colleagues chuckled at my frantic theories, dismissing them as stress-induced paranoia. Dr. Evans from the physics department suggested vibrations from underground rail lines might cause subtle shifts, but he couldn't explain the perfect timing with each tick, nor why only my room exhibited such phenomena. After sleepless nights spiraling into creeping dread, I resolved to change the room's layout. I dragged the bed to the opposite wall, repositioned the desk beneath the window, and, most importantly, tried to remove the clock. It was impossible. Though hanging from a simple brass hook, the clock refused to budge. The wood beneath my fingers radiated an unnatural warmth, almost pulsing rhythmically like a living heart. The longer I touched it, the more a crushing vertigo overwhelmed me, and soon blood trickled from my nostrils. I withdrew, shaken and helpless. That night, the room transformed into a chamber of horrors. The furniture no longer moved in straight lines but traced dizzying, complex patterns. My keys spun in tight circles atop the nightstand, my shoes slowly rotated by the door as if dancing to a sinister melody only they could hear. Whispered voices seemed to emanate from the walls, barely audible at first, then rising in frantic crescendo, like a chorus of lost souls crying out from beyond. In the darkest hours, the clock chimed 13 times. The pendulum's sway lengthened unnaturally, casting grotesque shadows that twisted and writhed against the walls. The strange symbols on its face glowed faintly, pulsating with a malevolent light. I felt eyes, countless unseen eyes, piercing through the gloom, watching, waiting. And then came the knocking. Soft at first, then urgent, relentless, pounding against the door from the empty hallway outside. I dared not open it. A cold draft seeped beneath the threshold, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. The knocking grew louder, echoing through the house like the heartbeat of some ancient beast awakened from slumber. I realized, with chilling clarity, that the clock was no mere timekeeper. It was a gate, a conduit between worlds, between past and present, between the living and the dead. Each tick and tock a heartbeat of something ancient and terrible, pulling at the fragile veil that separates reality from nightmare. I write this now, barely holding on to my sanity, as the clock continues its endless ticking. I don't know how much longer I can resist its call, or what lies waiting in the shadows just beyond the door. If you ever find yourself in a room where time itself seems to warp and breathe, remember Mrs. Pritchard's warning. Mind the clock. It keeps its own counsel. Would you dare stay until the final chime? This story is only the beginning. Stay tuned if you crave more tales where time unravels and shadows whisper dark secrets. If you want, I can continue expanding with further psychological suspense, spectral encounters, or dive deeper into the clock's origins and its sinister purpose. Just let me know. A pen rolled uphill across the slanted desk surface, defying every law of gravity and reason. I documented everything with obsessive precision in my research journal, filling page after page with timestamps, measurements, and frantic notes, as if sheer academic rigor could somehow tame the growing chaos. The clock's ticking grew louder each night, evolving from a simple metronome to a resonant, hollow knock that bypassed my ears and seemed to hammer directly against my skull. Sleep became a distant memory, haunted by the relentless pulse of time and the whisper of objects sliding imperceptibly across every surface. My work suffered under this creeping madness. Colleagues began to notice the wild look in my eyes, the dark, cavernous circles beneath them, and my jittery reactions to the most ordinary sounds. In desperation, on the 10th night, I stuffed cotton in my ears and draped a towel over the clock face, hoping to muffle the incessant ticking. But when I woke, the cotton was neatly pushed out, the towel folded with surgical precision across my chest. The ticking now seemed triumphant, mocking me, daring me to resist. The breaking point came when the room itself betrayed me. Measurements taken morning and night revealed impossible shifts, the ceiling stretched higher by noon only to contract as midnight approached, the distance between my bed and desk warped unpredictably throughout the day. Pressing my palm against the cold plaster, I felt a subtle pulse, as though the entire room was alive, breathing, watching. 37 days into my stay, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment. Running my hands along the baseboards in a desperate search for answers, my fingers found a section of wallpaper that gave way under pressure. A narrow panel slid open, revealing a cramped space barely larger than a shoebox. Inside lay a trove of cassette tapes, each meticulously labeled with names and dates stretching back to 1981, the latest just 6 months ago. My hands trembled as I purchased an old cassette player from a dusty second-hand shop nearby. The device felt like a talisman against the encroaching darkness as I returned, locked the door, and selected the oldest tape. Static hissed, then a young woman's weary voice emerged, thick with a Welsh accent. Elizabeth Morgan, physics student, 1981. Her words echoed my own experiences, the synchronized movements, the impossible clock, the subtle dimensional warping. She recorded over 3 months, her tone shifting from detached curiosity to raw, desperate fear. Her final entry spoke of patterns forming equations, mathematical descriptions of something trying to solve its way into our dimension, breaking through the fragile barrier of reality. I devoured every tape in chronological order. 12 tenants over 40 years, each chronicling the same haunting phenomena with unique perspectives. A mathematician in '87 plastered his walls with formulas, mapping the room's eerie choreography. A psychologist in '93 claimed the room responded to her subconscious fears. A theology student in '99 was convinced he witnessed time bleeding from purgatory itself. The pattern was clear, the experience intensified with every occupant, the clock's grasp tightening like an invisible noose. The most recent tapes belonged to Marcus Schaefer, a quantum physics doctoral candidate. His recordings spiraled into fragmented theories, broken sentences, and finally breathless silence, punctuated only by the amplified ticking of the clock and whispered warnings, "It's solving us," thinning the membrane. Goosebumps crawled over my skin as the truth sank in. I was no longer just a witness, I was the latest variable in an accelerating equation, part of a process begun decades ago, inching relentlessly closer to some unknown, terrifying conclusion. That night, the room's manifestations exploded in intensity. My phone vibrated violently across the nightstand until it slipped and tumbled to the floor, then, as if drawn by an unseen force, it began an eerie pilgrimage toward the clock. My clothes shifted in the closet, sleeves stretching and curling like seaweed caught in a current. The air turned unstable, hot, cold, then biting cold again. Sweat formed in droplets only to freeze mid-fall, shattering on the hardwood floor with a faint, sinister chime. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs as I watched a ballpoint pen lift from the desk, hanging suspended in the air, motionless, defying gravity while everything else around it writhed in unnatural motion. Time was no longer a force measured by clocks. It had become a living, breathing entity, twisting reality in its merciless grip. And somewhere in the dark, the clock ticked on. Would you dare stay until the last second? Because once time's riddle begins to unravel, there is no turning back. That night, the boundary between reality and nightmare thinned almost to transparency. The clock's pendulum swung slower now, each tick reverberating like the strike of a funeral bell in an empty cathedral. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, creeping across the floor like fingers searching for something lost. I felt a presence, cold and patient, lurking just beyond my vision. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of old wood, earth, and something metallic, like blood long dried. My breath came in shallow gasps as the room seemed to pulse in rhythm with the clock, the walls bending subtly as if alive, breathing with sinister intent. Objects no longer moved randomly. They began to arrange themselves, books stacked into spirals that defied logic, shoes placed heel to toe, lining the walls like silent sentinels. The whispers I had heard before grew into guttural murmurs, voices spoken in half-remembered Welsh, indecipherable yet dripping with menace. My reflection in the window fractured. For a moment, it was not my face but a gaunt figure with hollow eyes staring back. Then it vanished, replaced by the moonlit courtyard, but the garden was wrong. Twisted trees bent in impossible angles, their branches clawing at the sky like desperate hands. The cassette tape's voices echoed through the room, overlapping, as if trapped souls reaching out. Elizabeth's trembling voice begged for release, Marcus's breath caught in terror, a chorus of warning stitched together in a tapestry of fear. I was no longer alone. Something was here, something old and patient, solving the puzzle of time itself, hungry to slip through the thinning veil and into our world. With trembling hands, I reached toward the clock, the wood warm as a living heart. The glyphs on its face pulsed brighter, casting a sickly green glow that bathed the room in spectral light. And then, silence. The pendulum stopped. The room held its breath. Then, with a grinding creak like ancient stone shifting beneath the earth, the hidden door behind the clock began to open. What awaited beyond was no longer just a mystery of time. It was a portal to a place where nightmares dwell, where time twists upon itself in eternal torment. I had to decide, step through the threshold or forever be trapped in this waking nightmare, a prisoner to the clock's cruel design. Do you have the courage to follow? The one fixed point in a universe that was otherwise fluid. This terrifying paradox gripped me far more than any shifting object ever could. The force at work was not merely moving things, it was rewriting the fundamental relationships between space, time, and matter. Sleep was no longer a refuge. I sat rigidly in the creaking desk chair, feeling the room breathe around me, expanding and contracting with each thunderous, distorted tick of the clock. The cryptic symbols on its face began to rotate, rearranging themselves into new, incomprehensible configurations that seared my vision, persisting even behind closed eyelids. My mind, beyond my control, raced to calculate, solving equations that defied logic or conscious understanding. My nose bled again, the droplet hanging suspended in the air before it traced a perfect, haunting arc toward the clock's face. The pendulum, steady and relentless for weeks, slowed. Each swing lengthened, stretching into a deep, reverberating boom that shook my bones as if the very marrow inside me was resonating with some alien rhythm. I should have fled. Every primal instinct screamed to run. But I was rooted, paralyzed by equal parts curiosity and dread. The rational academic within me clung to the hope of an explanation, some complex physical phenomenon that I could analyze, document, and ultimately master. Yet, another part, raw and ancient, whispered that I was in the presence of something utterly alien, older than humanity itself. As dawn broke, the pendulum halted mid-swing, frozen at an impossible angle that defied every law of gravity I knew. Silence crashed over the room like a tidal wave. Every object, books, clothes, dust motes, even particles of air, froze, many suspended in midair, as if the laws governing them had momentarily unraveled. Then, all at once, they moved, not toward the clock, as I had feared, but toward me. Slowly, deliberately, with terrible precision, as if I were the center of some immense magnetic force. My ears popped painfully as the air pressure shifted violently, the walls bowed inward as reality itself folded and compressed, crushing the space around me until distance lost all meaning. In that vertigo of dimensions collapsing, I understood what the others before me had sensed but never fully grasped: the clock was not the cause of the movements were causing the clock. We, a succession of tenants over decades, had been unwitting variables in a vast cosmic calculation, our presence and observations crucial components of a process now reaching its terrifying resolution. The clock's face cracked down the middle, and from the fissure emerged not metal and gears, but a profound, impossible darkness. It was not the mere absence of light, but the presence of something utterly unknowable, a void beyond human perception or comprehension. My consciousness stretched thin, as if pulled across an infinite plane without edges or boundaries. Time lost all meaning in that space, an eternity and a moment folded into one. Then, reality snapped back, and I found myself crumpled on the floor, nose bleeding, ears ringing like church bells after a storm. The clock appeared unchanged, its pendulum swinging with that perfect, relentless rhythm. But something fundamental had shifted within me. When I staggered to my feet, my shadow betrayed me, lingering on the floor for 3 slow ticks before crawling up the wall to rejoin me. My voice echoed oddly, sounds reached my ears moments before my lips moved. When I touched the wall, my fingertips met its surface before my hand was fully extended. I realized then the truth: the boundary between cause and effect in that room was broken. Time was no longer a strict sequence but a malleable, optional framework. The clock had never measured time, it had redefined it. I fled that morning, abandoning nearly everything. Mrs. Pritchard accepted my sudden departure with a cold, knowing resignation, refusing my payment for the remaining lease. Her final words haunted me, "It usually takes them longer to leave. You must be quicker than the others." I stayed with a colleague for 2 days before finding a new apartment across the city. I tried to dismiss everything as hallucination, stress, or a cruel prank. But evidence clung to me like a second skin. My watch now runs exactly 3.17 seconds fast, no matter how often I reset it. When I pour coffee, the liquid reaches the rim of the cup moments before it leaves the pot. Time, I learned, no longer obeys me. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, the ticking of that clock still echoes, reminding me that some forces, once touched, never truly let go. Story 1, The Clock's Whisper. Sometimes I catch my reflection in mirrors continuing movements I've already completed, an unsettling echo of myself that blurs the line between now and what's already past. But most disturbing are the dreams, equations swirling in my mind, complex formulas that map the folding of spacetime around a fixed point. In those dreams, I understand them perfectly, as if some hidden language is being revealed. Yet the moment I wake, the clarity slips away, leaving only a gnawing certainty that something fundamental was altered in that room. Yesterday, I recorded my experience onto a cassette tape. Tomorrow, I plan to return to the house long enough to place it in a hidden compartment alongside the others, not for some future tenant's benefit, but to honor a purpose I now understand. We were never meant to find these tapes. They, like us, are variables in an ongoing cosmic calculation. The equation is still solving itself, unfolding with relentless precision. With every passing day, the conviction deepens, we succeeded in opening a door never meant to be opened. Though I am miles away now, the clock's ticking haunts me still. I hear it in my sleep, in moments of silence, in the very spaces between my heartbeats. Time itself has gained texture, a palpable weight pressing against my skin. Sometimes, when I awake in the dead of night, my belongings have shifted, ever so slightly, as if guided by a phantom hand. Each object moves in perfect synchronization with a clock that is no longer there. Story 2, The Stone Circle. The blood was still wet. That's the image seared into my memory, crimson footprints catching the last rays of the afternoon sun as they vanished into the dense pine forest. Human footprints, unmistakably so, yet something about their spacing was wrong, as if whoever or whatever left them was moving with an unnatural gait. My watch read 4:47 p.m. We had less than 2 hours before sunset. I should have turned back then. I should have convinced Mark and Tyler to retreat to the car. But instead, I pointed wordlessly toward the tree line, and we followed the blood trail deeper into the woods. Mist thickened with each step, each breath hanging in the air before me like ghostly apparitions. The blood trail remained unbroken, no pooling, no faltering, just steady footprints leading us forward with mechanical precision. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the warmth of my jacket. Something was profoundly wrong here. Tyler whispered behind me, voice barely audible over the crunch of fallen leaves, "This isn't right." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Mark was silent, but I could hear his breathing grow more rapid. The woodland sounds had vanished, no bird songs, no rustling of small creatures. Just our footsteps and labored breaths slicing through an unnatural silence. We'd been hiking the Cascade Trails for 3 days, documenting forgotten historical sites for Tyler's anthropology dissertation. This region was known for hidden stone structures, remnants of long-abandoned 19th-century settlements. But nothing in our research had prepared us for this. The trees thinned, and my breath caught. Before us stood a perfect circle of 12 standing stones, each about 7 feet tall, cloaked in thick moss and lichen. These weren't rough megaliths but perfectly rectangular columns, spaced with mathematical precision around a clearing 30 feet across. The blood trail led straight to the circle's center, then vanished. This place wasn't on any map. Mark finally broke the silence, voice cracking as he pulled out his phone, frantically searching for signal. I didn't need to see the screen to know there was none. An oppressive isolation settled over us. I urged that we document the site quickly and leave before darkness fell. Tyler agreed, though his usual enthusiasm was muted. Mark hesitated, eyes fixed on the circle's heart where the blood disappeared. There was something in his gaze, not fear, but recognition. I brushed it off as stress. Tyler started photographing the stones as I circled the perimeter, jotting notes in my journal. The stories converge. The more I write, the more I realize these two tales, separated by decades and miles, are threads of the same unsettling tapestry. The clock that bends time, the stones that mark forgotten rites, the wet blood that leads into silence, they speak of a boundary between worlds stretched thin, a cosmic riddle unraveling. We're witnesses to forces far older and stranger than we can imagine. And the question remains, how much longer before we become part of the calculation itself? The fading light swallowed the forest as we hurried to document the stones. Tyler's camera clicks echoed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence, each flash revealing moss-cloaked columns standing like ancient sentinels guarding secrets better left forgotten. Mark's gaze never left the center of the circle. His fingers trembled as he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, a weathered, yellowed map marked with the very stones we now faced. His lips parted, but no words came. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated through the air, subtle but growing, like the deep heartbeat of the earth itself. The standing stones began to pulse faintly, a phosphorescent glow leaking from cracks in the moss. A chill seized me, the hairs on my neck rising as if warning of something approaching beyond the veil. Then came the whispers, soft, dissonant voices in a language older than the forest. They circled us, weaving through the trees, stirring the mist into ghostly shapes that writhed and twisted. Tyler grabbed my arm, eyes wide. "We shouldn't be here," he breathed. But it was too late. The ground beneath us shuddered. The stone circle's glow intensified, casting twisted shadows that danced and shifted. From the center, where the blood had vanished, a dark fissure cracked open, an abyss swallowing the last light. Mark's face contorted, not in fear, but in grim recognition. "They are waking," he whispered. "The ones who keep time, the ones who watch." I remembered then the tapes, the clock, the endless calculations, an ancient mechanism unfolding its design, bridging worlds. The veil between moments thin. In that liminal space, time folded upon itself. Reflections moved out of sync. Whispers became commands. And the earth beneath the stones began to pulse with the heartbeat of an entity older than memory. We stood at the threshold, caught between worlds. The forest held its breath. The ticking began again. The fissure yawned before us like a wound torn open in the fabric of the world, blacker than the absence of light, a void that swallowed all sense of distance and depth. Stepping closer, the air thickened into something almost viscous, heavy with the scent of ancient stone, wet earth, and a faint metallic tang that whispered of blood long dried but never forgotten. As I peered into the darkness, the edges of the fissure seemed to ripple, as if reality itself were liquid, folding and bending in impossible ways. The standing stone's faint glow pulsed rhythmically, casting erratic shadows that writhed like living things along the jagged walls. Compelled by a force both terrifying and irresistible, I stepped forward, first one foot, then another, feeling the boundary between worlds dissolve beneath my skin. Suddenly, the ground gave way, and I plunged downward into a realm untethered from time or space. I landed on a surface unlike any earth I'd known, cold, smooth, and faintly luminous. Around me stretched an endless expanse of shifting geometry, colossal arches bent in impossible angles, spheres and spirals twisting through voids of deep indigo and flickering starlight. The air was alive with a hum, an ancient resonance vibrating through the bones of this place, like the echo of the clock's relentless ticking magnified 1,000-fold. Shapes moved at the periphery of my vision, shadowy figures whose forms flickered between solidity and vapor, their eyes glowing with a light that felt both alien and ancient. They whispered in that same lost language, a cascade of sound that touched the edges of comprehension but never settled into meaning. In the center of this vast expanse hung a colossal structure, a monolithic clockwork mechanism, infinitely intricate, its gears spinning with fluid grace yet emitting no sound. The clock face was a swirling vortex of symbols, mathematical, arcane, and yet eerily familiar. I realized then, this was the heart of the cosmic calculation. The nexus where time's equations were written, rewritten, and solved, a place where past, present, and future collided and merged in eternal flux. The shadowy entities drifted closer, their gaze penetrating. They were not hostile, but guardians, keepers of the fragile boundary between dimensions, observers of the pattern unfolding across epochs. One reached out, a tendril of light brushing my forehead. Suddenly, knowledge flooded my mind. The room, the clock, the tapes, they were but a node in an immense network, a grand algorithm encoding the universe's hidden truths. We, the tenants, were variables, data points in an experiment spanning millennia. The entity showed me glimpses of other realms, worlds folded within folds, time loops curling back upon themselves, lives lived countless times over in fractal repetition. But there was a warning, the calculation was nearing completion. If the equation balanced, reality as we know it would be reshaped. The membrane between worlds could rupture. I felt myself pulled back, the luminous realm dissolving like mist. I crashed onto the forest floor once more, heart pounding, breath ragged. The fissure sealed silently behind me. The standing stones returned to their silent watch. But I knew the clock was still ticking, the calculation still unfolding. And somewhere beyond, the guardians waited. Sometimes, I catch my reflection in mirrors continuing movements I've already completed, a cruel echo of time slipping through my fingers. But more unsettling still are the dreams that haunt me, equations, complex mathematical formulas describing the folding of spacetime around a fixed point. In those dreams, I understand everything perfectly, as if some ancient truth is whispered to me. But when I wake, it all slips away, leaving only a deep certainty that something fundamental was irrevocably changed in that room. Yesterday, I recorded everything on a cassette tape, my voice trembling, my thoughts fragmented. Tomorrow, I will return to the house just long enough to place this tape in the hidden compartment alongside the others. Not for some future tenant's curiosity. No, these tapes, like us, exist as variables in an ongoing cosmic calculation. The equation continues to solve itself. With every passing day, I grow more convinced we have opened a door never meant to be unlocked. Though I am miles away, the clock's ticking follows me. I hear it in my sleep, in moments of quiet, in the silences between heartbeats. Time has taken on a texture, something I can almost feel against my skin. And sometimes, when I wake in the dead of night, my possessions have shifted, ever so slightly, moved with a precision that chills me. Each object aligned perfectly, in step with a clock that is no longer there. The blood was still wet. That's the image I cannot forget, crimson footprints glistening in the dying afternoon light, fading into the dense pine forest. Human footprints, unmistakably so, yet something about their spacing was wrong, unnatural. As if the footsteps belonged to something otherworldly, moving with a gait that defied logic. My watch read 4:47 p.m. We had less than 2 hours before the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. I should have turned back then. I should have convinced Mark and Tyler to retreat to the car. But instead, I pointed silently toward the tree lean, and we followed the blood trail deeper into the woods. The air thickened with mist as we stepped away from the worn hiking path. Every breath hung before me, fragile and ghostly in the stillness. The blood trail was steady, no pooling, no breaks, just relentless footprints, leading us forward with mechanical precision. A shiver crawled down my spine despite the warmth of my hiking jacket. Something was profoundly wrong here, but curiosity pulled us onward like moths to a flame. "This isn't right," Tyler whispered behind me, voice barely audible over the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. I nodded silently, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. Mark said nothing, but I could hear his breathing quicken. The woodland sounds faded, no birdsong, no rustling of small creatures, just our footsteps and heavy breaths cutting through an unnatural silence. We had been hiking the Cascade trails for 3 days, cataloging forgotten historical sites for Tyler's anthropology dissertation. This region was known for hidden stone structures, remnants of long-abandoned 19th-century settlements. But nothing in our research prepared us for this. The trees thinned, and my breath caught. Before us stood a perfect circle of 12 standing stones, each 7 feet tall, blanketed in thick moss and lichen. They were not rough megaliths as one might expect, but perfectly rectangular columns, spaced with unsettling precision around a 30-foot clearing. The blood trail led directly to the circle's center, then vanished. This place was absent from any map. Mark finally spoke, his voice cracking as he pulled out his phone, frantically searching for signal. I didn't need to see the screen to know there was none. A heavy, suffocating feeling settled in my gut. We were utterly isolated. I urged that we document quickly and leave before darkness swallowed the forest. Tyler agreed immediately, his usual enthusiasm tempered by the creeping dread. Mark hesitated, eyes fixed on the circle's heart where the bloody footprints vanished. There was something in his gaze, not fear, but recognition. I brushed it off as stress, though unease gnawed at me. Tyler began photographing the stones, while I traced the perimeter with a journal, noting every detail. 2 separate tales, decades and miles apart, yet woven from the same fabric of eerie patterns, shifting realities, and time unraveling. The clock that bends time, the stones that mark forgotten rites, the blood that leads into silence, they whisper of a boundary stretched thin between worlds. We are witnesses to a riddle older than memory. And the question remains, how long before we too become part of the calculation? Each stone bore markings, subtle at first glance but unmistakable upon closer inspection, symbols carved deep into the weathered rock, worn smooth by time yet still legible. Some resembled letters from forgotten alphabets, glyphs lost to memory. Others depicted crude human figures frozen in strange poses. My fingers traced one figure carefully, a person with arms outstretched, legs splayed in a star pattern. The stone beneath felt unnaturally cold, as if greedily drawing heat from my skin, leaching warmth like a living parasite. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the clearing like creeping fingers. I checked my watch, 6:13 p.m. Sunset was imminent. I called to the others, suggesting we turn back before darkness swallowed the forest. But Mark's voice stopped me. "Look at the ground," he said, pointing toward the center of the circle where the bloody footprints had vanished. There, the grass withered in a perfect circle, scorched as if some corrosive substance had been poured over it. In the middle of the dead patch lay a small object. Despite every instinct screaming at me to keep away, I approached cautiously. It was a pocket watch, antique brass, finely engraved, its chain coiled like a copper serpent resting atop the lifeless grass. I knelt to examine it but dared not touch. The watch face was cracked, its hands frozen at 6:47 p.m., just 34 minutes from now. A sudden cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying the sharp scent of copper and damp earth. The temperature plunged rapidly. My breath formed thick clouds that hung in the air as I stumbled backward, unease wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. "We need to leave. Now," I urged, my voice firmer than I felt. But as I turned toward the narrow gap between 2 stones where we had entered, a sickening realization struck me. I couldn't find it. Each gap looked identical. The forest beyond twisted and shimmered like a mirage, as if reality itself had unraveled. The sun kissed the horizon, bleeding the sky with hues of orange and crimson. Long shadows stretched from the stones, converging on the dead patch like grasping black fingers. Tyler's camera flashed relentlessly, documenting the surreal scene as his scientific curiosity battled his mounting fear. Mark stood frozen, eyes locked on the pocket watch. "Don't touch it," I warned, though my voice sounded distant and hollow, swallowed by an invisible void. Mark's gaze lifted slowly, blank and unreadable. "It's starting," he said simply. Before I could respond, a low hum filled the clearing, not heard, but felt deep in my chest, vibrating painfully and making my teeth ache. The shadows cast by the stones darkened and thickened, weaving into a vast web of darkness across the ground. At the center, over the pocket watch, a shape began to rise. At first, it seemed like smoke twisting skyward, a dark column writhing in the wind. Then it solidified into a figure. Tall, thin, and cloaked in a tattered robe that seemed to ripple with a life of its own, the figure's face was hidden deep within the shadow of its hood. My heart thundered, my mouth dried to dust. Tyler stopped photographing, his camera hanging forgotten at his side. Mark remained still, his face now twisted into a smile that chilled me to the bone. The hooded figure stood motionless for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it raised its right arm. To my horror, my own right arm lifted in perfect synchrony, as though pulled by invisible strings. The figure tilted its head, and I mirrored the motion. It shifted weight to one foot, so did I. Desperate, I looked to my companions. Tyler's body echoed the figure's every movement, his face a mask of terror. But Mark. Mark's smile deepened, his eyes gleaming with something unknowable. I tried to scream. Only a weak wheeze escaped. The figure began a deliberate sequence, stepping forward, sidestepping, raising and lowering arms in an arcane dance. Our bodies obeyed, moving as one, puppets caught in a silent choreography. With each step, the symbols on the stones flickered faintly, pulsing in response to our dance. My mind raced through rational explanations, hypnosis, mass hallucination, airborne toxins, but deep down, I knew this was something far beyond. Sweat soaked my clothes despite the biting cold. And somewhere deep within, a primal terror whispered, this was no dance we chose to join. The air grew colder still, biting through my soaked clothes like shards of ice. Our bodies moved of their own accord, caught in the unyielding rhythm dictated by the hooded figure. The stones around us pulsed with an eerie light, their glow intensifying as shadows stretched and warped, creeping along the forest floor like living tendrils. A low chant began, not from any of us, but from the very earth itself, a guttural hum rising beneath our feet and swelling into a haunting chorus that reverberated through the clearing. The sound penetrated my bones, stirring memories that weren't mine, whispering secrets of ages forgotten. Mark's smile twisted into something grotesque, a mask of ecstasy and madness. His eyes reflected the starlight as he stepped forward, leading the dance with a confidence none of us possessed. Tyler's terror deepened, his face contorted in silent screams that no sound could escape. Then the ground beneath us shuddered violently. The circle of stones began to sink slowly into the earth, pulling us down into darkness. The trees around the clearing seemed to bend inward, closing ranks like ancient sentinels sealing their prize. My vision blurred as vertigo overwhelmed me. I felt my soul wrenching, being torn between this world and another, between life and something beyond. The hooded figure vanished into the shadows, but its presence remained, a suffocating weight pressing on my chest. Time itself fractured, seconds stretched into eternities, moments folded over themselves. Suddenly, the earth gave way completely. We plunged into an abyss of swirling darkness and cold. The blood on my hands was no longer mine, it belonged to centuries of forgotten souls trapped in this eternal dance. When I finally regained awareness, I was alone. The forest was gone. I stood in a vast, endless void, lit by an unearthly glow. The stones circled me still, inscribed with glowing runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. Whispers filled the air, voices of those lost before me, tenants who never left, their fates entwined in the endless calculation. I understood then, the circle was a trap, a mechanism to harvest time itself, to bind souls into the cosmic equation that governs existence. Each step in the ritual sealed our fate, forever dancers in a macabre waltz across dimensions, caught between moments, never truly living or dying. As I reached out to the empty void, the hooded figure reappeared, its eyes gleaming beneath the cowl. You belong to the cycle now, it intoned, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. And with that, the shadows closed in. The night deepened, and with it, the eternal dance continues. In that endless void, surrounded by glowing stones and whispers of the lost, despair threatened to consume me. Yet somewhere deep within, a flicker of resistance sparked, an ember of hope that the cycle might be broken. The hooded figure watched silently, a predator confident in its prey's futility. But I was no longer the same. The memories of those who came before me, Elizabeth, Marcus, and the others, echoed in my mind, their warnings and fragments of knowledge offering threads to grasp. I remembered the tapes, the cryptic equations that spoke of folds in spacetime, the calculations that governed this endless dance. If this cycle was a cosmic equation, then perhaps it could be rewritten. Drawing on the fragmented dreams that revealed the geometry of this realm, I moved deliberately, tracing patterns in the glowing runes etched upon the stones. My fingers brushed the carvings, and I felt a resonance, a fragile connection to the fabric of this place. The air thickened as the hooded figure stirred, sensing my defiance. It raised its arm, a silent command to the shadows that writhed like serpents, ready to bind me anew. But then, a sudden insight, a sequence hidden within the symbols, a counter-rhythm to the endless ticking. I began to move differently, stepping out of the choreographed dance, breaking the pattern with erratic, unpredictable motions. The stones flickered, the runes dimmed, and the shadows recoiled. The hooded figure hissed in frustration, its form flickering like a dying flame. I reached for the pocket watch, the artifact that had begun it all, suspended now in the void. Its cracked face no longer marked time but held the key, the moment frozen at 6:47 p.m. With trembling hands, I twisted the crown, reversing the hands against the flow. A deafening silence swallowed the whispers. The stones shattered, fragments dissolving into stardust. The void trembled. And then, light. I awoke suddenly, gasping, back on the forest floor at the edge of the stone circle. The sun was dipping below the horizon, the oppressive chill lifting as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Mark and Tyler lay nearby, unconscious but alive. The pocket watch lay broken beside me, its hands shattered. We had escaped. But the forest around us seemed altered, the trees whispered secrets, the air thrummed with residual energy. The cycle was broken, but not ended. Somewhere, the clock still ticks. And the dance may begin anew. Emerging from the forest's shadow, we carried with us more than just the bruises and cold of that otherworldly night. The broken pocket watch in my trembling hand was a fragment of a truth far larger than any of us could have imagined. It was both a weapon and a warning. Our first step was to gather knowledge, the fragmented tapes, the cryptic symbols on the stones, the whispered equations folded within my dreams. Elizabeth Morgan, Marcus Schaefer, and the others had left traces for us, scattered breadcrumbs through decades of fear and fascination. Back at the university, we pored over ancient manuscripts and obscure physics treatises. We consulted linguists to decode the forgotten alphabets, mathematicians to parse the strange formulas that described spacetime folding around fixed points. The realization settled like a chill. The cosmic force we had disturbed was no mere entity but a fundamental mechanism, an algorithm woven into the very fabric of reality, regulating the flow of time and existence itself. Confronting it would not be a battle of strength, but of understanding. Our research led us to a theory, that the clock, the stone circle, and the dimensional rift were nodes in a vast cosmic lattice. Each node held part of the calculation that maintained universal balance. Disturbing one risked unraveling the whole. To face this force meant more than closing fissures or destroying artifacts. It required rewriting the calculation, reclaiming agency in a process that had long treated humanity as mere variables. We assembled a team, physicists, mathematicians, historians, and shamans, each bringing their perspective to the puzzle. Our plan was audacious, to re-engage the cycle on our terms, entering the stone circle at the precise alignment of time and space, to perform a ritual combining scientific precision with ancient rites. The night arrived again. The circle waited, stones bathed in moonlight, shadows whispering secrets. Heart pounding, I stepped into the center, clutching the broken watch. Around me, my companions moved in coordinated steps, tracing patterns derived from the equations and symbols we had decoded. The air thickened, the familiar hum rising to a crescendo. The hooded figure appeared, silent, patient, but this time, we met it with eyes wide open. We were no longer puppets. With voices steady and minds focused, we began to speak the countercode, the sequence to realign the cosmic algorithm. Symbols on the stones glowed in response, shadows recoiling. The rift flickered, unstable. For a moment, it seemed we could succeed. But the force resisted fiercely, a tempest of darkness and distortion seeking to reclaim its dominion. Our bodies strained, minds pushed beyond limits. Then, a breakthrough, the rift shimmered and closed with a final, resounding pulse. Silence. The stones ceased their glow. Time felt lighter. We had disrupted the calculation. But as dawn broke, I felt a new awareness settle within me. The cosmic force was not defeated, only deferred. It had learned. And it would return. The battle was only beginning. My muscles strained against the invisible force controlling them, but resistance was futile. Every forced movement sent shooting pains through my joints, as if my body was being stretched beyond its limits. Amid the panic clouding my mind, something crucial snapped into focus. The glowing symbols corresponded exactly to our movements. The figure wasn't moving randomly, it was demonstrating a pattern, a sequence tied to the carvings on the stones. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was no mere dance. It was a test. A ritual. Tyler had caught on too. His eyes flicked between the stones, tracking the pattern of illuminated symbols. Our eyes met briefly, understanding flashing between us like a lightning strike. We needed to decode the sequence. If we failed, we would be trapped forever. The figure increased its pace, its movements becoming more intricate, more demanding. My limbs burned as they obeyed, my will submerged beneath the relentless compulsion. I fought to memorize every step, left arm raised, right foot forward, bow, spin clockwise, arms outstretched. Mark moved with eerie fluidity, that unsettling smile never leaving his face. Had he known about this place all along? The thought slithered through my mind like poison. Had he led us here intentionally? Suddenly, the pocket watch in the center chimed, a haunting, impossible sound given its broken state. The figure froze. So did we. Slowly, it retreated to the circle's center, releasing us from its mirrored hold. I collapsed to my knees, gasping. Tyler crumpled beside me, pale and trembling. Mark alone remained standing, relaxed as if the ordeal had been a pleasant stroll. What the hell is happening? I hissed, suspicion and fear sharpening my voice. Mark turned, eyes reflecting the dying crimson light. The mirror guardian, he said simply, as if that explained everything. It shows the way out, if you're clever enough to see. Tyler crawled closer, sweat slick on his pale face. Whispering urgently, he said he'd deciphered the pattern, how the symbols corresponded to specific stones, forming a sequence. If we could replicate it correctly on our own, it might set us free. The darkness deepened as the sun vanished below the horizon. The only illumination came from the glowing symbols etched into the stones and a sickly phosphorescence radiating from the hooded figure. The humming grew louder, pressing against my eardrums like a physical force. The figure began moving again, but this time, fluidly, almost like a dance. Our bodies remained our own, no longer forced to mirror its every move. Instead, it gestured toward us, then around the circle. The message was clear, now it was our turn. Mark stepped forward with unnerving confidence, beginning to perform the sequence the figure had shown us. Tyler and I exchanged uncertain glances before joining him, our movements clumsy and hesitant in comparison. As we progressed, the stone's glow intensified, crackling with static energy that made my skin tingle and the air grow thick, heavy, almost suffocating. The figure watched intently from the center, its hooded face hidden but its gaze palpable. Each time we faltered, an arm raised instead of lowered, a misstep, the figure shook its head ever so slightly, and the humming deepened into a tormenting drone that threatened to shatter my mind. On our third attempt, Tyler stumbled. Instantly, the figure surged toward him with impossible speed. I shouted a warning, but it was too late. Its pale, corpse-like hand touched Tyler's forehead. His body went rigid, eyes rolling back. When it withdrew, Tyler moved mechanically, perfectly precise but utterly vacant, his face a mask of blankness. Terror clawed at my throat. Mark and I pushed forward, knowing that mistakes meant losing ourselves. My limbs screamed with exhaustion, but I forced them into the pattern: left, right, turn, bow, arms out. Finally, we completed the sequence. The stones blazed with an overwhelming blue-white light, momentarily blinding me. When my vision finally cleared, one of the gaps between the ancient stones began to glow with an unnatural light, brighter and more urgent than the rest. An exit, but not an ordinary one. Mark grasped my arm with a desperate urgency, his voice cutting through the suffocating silence. Now. Run. I hesitated, my eyes darting back to Tyler, who stood rooted to the spot, his vacant gaze locked onto the shadowy figure that had silently emerged. We couldn't just leave him here. But Mark's grip tightened sharply, pain searing through my arm. He's part of it now. There's no saving him. Defying the cold ache of exhaustion that weighed down my limbs, I wrenched my arm free and lunged toward Tyler, grasping him firmly and pulling him toward the eerie glow. His movements were sluggish, as if trapped in a viscous fog, reluctant but not actively resisting. The figure turned, slow, deliberate, almost angry in its unnatural motion. The humming sound that had filled the air swelled into a piercing shriek, sharp enough to make my blood run cold. I felt warm trickles of blood drip from my nose as Mark dashed through the narrowing gap. I pushed Tyler ahead and turned, just in time to glimpse what should have been a face beneath the figure's hood, but instead, there was only a liquid mirror, reflecting my own terror-stricken expression back at me, warped and distorted. I stumbled backward, tumbling through the narrow space, into Mark's arms beyond. Tyler followed moments later, collapsing onto the cold earth. The glowing fissure between the stones flickered and vanished, swallowed by an oppressive darkness. We were outside the circle, swallowed again by the familiar, yet now sinister forest. The bloody footprints that had marked our path were gone, wiped clean as if erased by some malevolent force. My watch read exactly 6:47 p.m. Tyler lay unconscious, but his breath was steady. With Mark's help, I lifted him, and the three of us staggered through the shadow-draped woods, our phone flashlights barely piercing the thick night. Tyler stirred an hour later, just as the glow of the car headlights broke through the trees. But he was different, quieter, his eyes shadowed with a strange introspection, moving sometimes in sync with Mark or me, as if our thoughts had begun to bleed into his own. Mark avoided my questions about how he knew what to do, speaking only in riddles about obscure research and ancient legends whispered by locals. That night, alone in the motel room, I reviewed the photos on Tyler's camera. The stone circle was captured in sharp detail, but the hooded figure was nowhere to be seen in any image. Instead, ghostly, blurred human silhouettes hovered at the center of each shot, positioned exactly where Mark, Tyler, and I had stood. In the final photo, taken just before sunset, I noticed something chilling. On the moss-covered center stone, an inscription appeared, almost pulsating with dark significance. As above, so below, as within, so without. As the universe, so the soul. Since that day, sleep has eluded me. In the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of Tyler mimicking my movements before I even make them, as though he sees shadows in a world I cannot reach. And when I look in the mirror, my reflection hesitates, just for a fraction of a second, before copying me. Mark vanished a week after our return. His apartment was left empty except for countless pages filled with arcane symbols matching the stone's inscriptions, arranged in the same pattern as our fearful ritual. I have tried to find the stone circle again, 3 desperate trips back to the forest. The trail remains, the trees still stand, but the circle itself has vanished, cloaked in some sinister invisibility meant only for me. Part of me is relieved. But a larger part knows that this nightmare is far from over. Yesterday, a pocket watch arrived in the mail. Its cracked face ticks steadily despite its worn brass casing. I don't know who sent it, and I don't want to. Its hands count down with an ominous rhythm I cannot comprehend. In the shifting light, I sometimes glimpse a hooded figure reflected faintly in the brass, waiting for me to finish the dance we never truly began. The first time I heard it, I dismissed the sound as an odd acoustic glitch. The second time, I questioned my sanity. But by the third time, dread had settled deep within me, a cold, crushing weight lodged in my chest like a stone that refuses to budge. My daily commute was the same, suburban streets, choking traffic, a mind-numbing 43 minutes of routine monotony. Until one day, it wasn't. A warehouse appeared. Not in some distant part of town, but right on my usual route. A hulking structure of rusted corrugated metal and shattered windows, wrapped in a fence topped with jagged barbed wire. It hadn't been there before, I was certain. The kind of place you learn to ignore. But the building whispered secrets, a menace lurking in its shadow. The air around it thickened, as if the very atmosphere conspired to suffocate any who dared approach. I started noticing things, flickering lights inside long after midnight, strange figures glimpsed through broken panes, and an undercurrent of cold static that made my skin crawl. One evening, curiosity overtook fear. I took a detour. And what I found there turned every shadow into a scream, every silence into a warning, a puzzle I couldn't unsee, pulling me deeper into a labyrinth where reality frayed, and terror waited patiently to claim me. The warehouse seemed to breathe with a life of its own, an ancient, restless presence concealed beneath layers of rust and decay. Its broken windows were like dark eyes, watching, waiting. I could feel the weight of unseen gazes pressing against my skin as I slowed my car to a crawl. The hum of my engine felt intrusive, a harsh note in the otherwise suffocating silence that clung to the property. I stepped out, the cold night air biting through my jacket, and approached the fence. The chain link was brittle and corroded, but still stood firm, as if warding off something far worse than me. Peering inside, my flashlight beam caught glimpses of discarded machinery, shattered crates, and a floor slick with something dark, almost reflective. I thought it was oil at first, but the gleam shifted unnervingly, like liquid shadows pooling and swirling beneath the weak light. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind, so soft it was almost impossible to hear. A string of words, ancient and guttural, wrapped in a cadence that twisted the tongue. My breath hitched, and my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wanted to run. But something invisible yet undeniable, rooted me to the spot. Days passed and the whispers grew louder in my mind, echoing in quiet moments, invading my dreams with riddles I could not solve. The warehouse seemed to seep into my reality, bleeding into my waking hours like a dark stain I couldn't wash away. One night, drawn by a compulsion I no longer controlled, I returned to the fence. The gate, previously locked, now hung ajar, creaking softly in the chill breeze. I stepped inside. The air inside was thick with dust and the metallic scent of old blood. My flashlight flickered, struggling to push back the darkness that swallowed the corners of the vast, empty space. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, but when I turned, there was nothing but shadows dancing on peeling walls. A low growl rumbled from deep within the building, vibrating through the floor into my bones. Panic clawed at my throat as a figure materialized ahead, half seen, cloaked in darkness. Its eyes glowed faintly, not human, but ancient, like the cold fires of forgotten stars. It whispered again, a promise or a warning, and I knew I was no longer alone. The next morning, I awoke in my car, parked miles from the warehouse, my body aching and my clothes torn. But worse than the physical wounds was the creeping certainty that something had come back with me, a shadow in my soul, a darkness that would never let go. Back at home, the nightmares worsened. The whispering voices tangled with my thoughts, turning memories into twisted puzzles, and dreams into waking horrors. Mirrors no longer reflected my image clearly, instead, they rippled like disturbed water, showing flickers of things that should not be, figures cloaked in shadow, eyes glowing from the depths. I tried to tell others, but words failed me. The warehouse, the stone circle, the hooded figure, they were parts of a puzzle no one else could see. My friend's eyes glazed over, or worse, they looked away as if fearing to catch the darkness for themselves. Then came the letters. Handwritten, no return address, ink smeared as if written in haste or tears. Each one contained cryptic symbols, matching those on the stones and marked scattered notes, and a single line. The dance has begun. Will you lead or follow? With every word, my sanity frayed further. And Tyler? He changed irrevocably. His silence became a vast ocean of secrets. Sometimes, I found him staring blankly into the void, murmuring the same phrase over and over. We are bound, beyond sight, beyond time. He no longer walked beside me, but seemed to drift alongside some invisible current. On rare occasions, his eyes would flash with something terrifyingly alien, a glimpse of the figure beneath the hood reflected within. Mark's disappearance remains the darkest mystery of all. I found his apartment ransacked in a way that suggested a hurried departure, papers torn, symbols scrawled wildly across walls and floors. But amid the chaos, a single object remained untouched, an ancient, leather-bound book embossed with the same cryptic inscription from the stone circle. Its pages whispered secrets in a language that felt like a dark lullaby, promising power, knowledge, and release, but only at a terrible price. Now, with the pocket watch ticking in my hand, I feel the weight of a fate I cannot escape. Each tick echoes a heartbeat, a countdown to a moment I cannot yet grasp. The reflection in the brass surface shifts, sometimes clearer, sometimes a mere shadow, but always watching. The dance continues. The steps are written in symbols and shadows. And I am trapped, caught between the light of what was and the darkness of what must come. Days slipped into restless nights as the ticking watch grew louder in my ears, a relentless metronome counting down to something unknown yet inevitable. The forest seemed to press closer, its shadows whispering secrets I was only beginning to understand. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, I found myself drawn once more to the place where the stone circle had vanished. The trail was faint but still there, a whisper beneath the fallen leaves. As I stepped deeper into the woods, a chill ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the feeling of unseen eyes watching, waiting. The air thickened. The trees seemed to lean closer, their gnarled branches like twisted fingers clawing at the sky. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, faint, rhythmic vibrations matching the ticking in my pocket. A low, guttural chant rose around me, echoing from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The language was ancient, impossible to understand, yet its meaning was clear, a summons, a call to return. I tried to turn back, but the forest shifted. Paths twisted and merged, leading me forward, deeper into the unknown. At the heart of the forest, where the stone circle should have been, I found only silence, and a single standing stone, taller and darker than I remembered. Its surface was smooth and reflective, like the face beneath the hood. As I approached, the stone shimmered, revealing glimpses of the past, Mark's frantic writings, Tyler's vacant eyes, the figure's mercurial face, and my own reflection twisted in fear and wonder. Then the whisper returned, closer now, surrounding me. Complete the dance, or be lost forever in the shadows between. I reached out to touch the stone, and the world tilted. A dilapidated sign hung precariously from one corner, its faded letters barely readable, Meridian Storage and Processing. The building bore the unmistakable scars of abandonment, shattered windows patched with plywood, rust creeping like a slow poison over metal beams, and peeling paint that whispered of decades lost to neglect. Whatever business had once thrived here was long gone, yet the place felt far from empty. The warehouse sat directly before a sharp bend in the road, a blind corner where cautious drivers habitually tapped their horns as a warning. On that first Monday morning, I did exactly that, a quick, perfunctory beep, and was nearly thrown from the road when the warehouse answered back. Not a distant echo, but a response, identical in tone, pitch, and duration, delayed by exactly 3 seconds, yet undeniably emanating from deep within the building's darkened interior. My heart lurched, coffee splashing onto my pressed work pants. I forced myself to keep driving, telling myself it was an odd acoustic quirk, a bizarre sound reflection. Buildings don't reply to car horns. On Tuesday, driven by a mix of skepticism and curiosity, I approached the corner with scientific determination. 2 short beeps this time. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, counting the seconds as my pulse thundered in my ears. 1, 2, 3. The warehouse answered with 2 perfectly matched beeps, delayed and unmistakable. By Friday, I experimented with different patterns, long, short, melodic sequences, each met with flawless replication after the same measured pause. My rational explanations crumbled. No natural echo behaves this way. No prankster could mimic so perfectly, and certainly not from within a building abandoned for decades. The weekend offered no respite, the unanswered questions nested in my mind, haunting every quiet moment. I scoured the internet for Meridian storage and processing, nothing recent, only a defunct company bankrupted in 1997. No clues, no leads. Monday dawned thick with fog, transforming my daily commute into a ghostly procession through cotton-white mist. The warehouse emerged in my peripheral vision, a darker mass, more ominous than before. Compelled by forces I could neither explain nor resist, I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching like dry bones beneath me. My engine ticked down in the cold air as I sat, heart pounding with every beat. Rational people don't investigate haunted warehouses because of phantom car horns. Yet there I was, caught between fear and fascination. The fence was tall and topped with rusted barbed wire. A padlocked gate barred the main entrance, but a nearby section of chain link had been pried open, jagged edges curling like claws. My clothes snagged on the metal as I squeezed through, a sharp rip tearing my shirt sleeve, the sound unnervingly loud in the still morning. The warehouse's main door was a massive sliding panel, partially ajar. It beckoned, an invitation wrapped in threat. I hesitated, suddenly aware of the rapid rise and fall of my breath, the slick of sweat on my forehead despite the cold. My phone showed no service bars. If something happened here, no one would find me. I considered retreat, the safety of the known, the mundane. Instead, I switched on the flashlight and stepped inside. The cavernous interior swallowed the beam, the ceiling lost in blackness far above. The concrete floor was littered with debris, broken pallets, crumpled papers, empty bottles stained with unknown residues. The air was heavy with dust and mildew, but beneath it lay a metallic tang that triggered a primal warning, the scent of old blood. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped, the echoes stretching unnaturally long through the vast room. My light swept across rusted machinery, collapsed shelving, graffiti scrawled like desperate messages on the walls, nothing to explain the sinister replies I'd heard. Then the beam caught a door on the far wall. It was a normal-sized door, strangely pristine amid the decay. No dust, no graffiti, its red paint vibrant and unmarred. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, my feet moved forward. Each step echoed in the vastness, but then those sounds returned, delayed, as if the building itself was playing back my movements. The sensation was dizzying, warping time and space. The red door had no handle. Instead, a small metal plate where one should be. I pressed my palm against it. The door swung open silently, revealing a corridor that could not exist within this forsaken place. Its walls gleamed with polished black stone, unnaturally smooth and cold. Soft blue light emanated from fissures along the edges, pulsing gently, a heartbeat in the darkness. The air was thick, almost viscous, carrying the faint scent of ozone and decay. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me with a whisper, swallowing the world I knew. Ahead, the corridor twisted impossibly, bending and folding like the inside of some living creature. A low hum vibrated beneath my feet, rising in tone and intensity as I moved deeper. Then came the voices. Whispered at first, unintelligible, a murmur like whine through dead leaves. But growing louder, clearer, shaping into words that slithered into my mind. You are chosen. The dance awaits. Finish what was begun. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned to flee, but the corridor shifted, folding behind me, blocking retreat. The lights dimmed. The walls pulsed as if breathing. From the shadows, figures emerged, cloaked and hooded, their faces molten reflections of my own fears. They circled slowly, silently, their presence pressing like cold water into my lungs. I understood then, this was no abandoned warehouse. It was a gateway. A trap. And the dance was far from over. According to the warehouse's exterior dimensions, the hallway I now found myself in should have ended well before this point. Yet it stretched endlessly before me, an impossible corridor defying physical laws. Unlike the derelict, decaying shell of the warehouse I had entered, this corridor was immaculate, its walls painted an institutional white so bright it almost hurt to look directly at them. The floor was covered in spotless white tiles, polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead with a sterile perfection that unsettled me further. Every 20 feet on either side, identical red doors lined the corridor, all closed, all devoid of handles or any visible means of opening. I stepped forward cautiously. Suddenly, the door I had entered through swung shut behind me with a soft click, then vanished entirely, replaced by seamless white wall. Panic surged, freezing my blood. My heart pounded erratically, my mouth went desert dry. I pressed both palms against the cold, unyielding surface where the door had been, solid and impenetrable. With no way back, I moved forward. My footsteps echoed, yet with that same unnatural delay I had come to dread. Each footfall repeated 3 seconds later, as if some invisible presence paced behind me, matching my movements precisely. I quickened my pace, the echoes quickened too. I stopped abruptly, the echoes stopped after 3 seconds. Deeper into the corridor, other sounds emerged, snatches of conversations, whispered fragments that slowly became recognizable. They were in my own voice, replaying moments from my daily life, a terse phone call with my boss, a heated argument with my ex-girlfriend, a joke I had told at last year's Christmas party. Each snippet seemed to pour from behind the red doors I passed, memories trapped and replayed like spectral recordings. My body betrayed me. Sweat soaked my shirt, shallow breaths clawed at my throat. A tremor took hold of my hands, persistent and merciless. Desperate, I tried the doors, they would not budge. Then I heard it, my laughter. Not a recording, but live, genuine, ringing from somewhere ahead, as though another version of myself was further down the corridor, sharing some private joke I was excluded from. I called out, my voice cracking, trembling with dread. The corridor answered, not with an echo, but with my exact words, spoken in my own voice, originating from behind me. I spun around, nothing but empty hallway greeted me. Turning back, I noticed one door ahead was slightly ajar. A thin line of warm, golden light spilled onto the white tile floor, stark against the sterile corridor. Approaching cautiously, I realized my footsteps no longer echoed. The corridor absorbed them, silencing me. Peeking through the gap, I glimpsed a perfect replica of my own living room. Every detail was rendered with uncanny fidelity, the coffee stain on the armrest, the stack of unread magazines on the side table. But this was not my apartment, I was miles away, trapped inside a labyrinthine corridor in an abandoned warehouse. I pushed the door wider. The room lay frozen in a quiet stillness, until I saw him. Sitting in my favorite chair was a figure identical to me. He stared back with the same shock and horror mirrored in my own eyes. We locked in paralyzed silence. With growing dread, I noticed his movements mirrored mine perfectly, but delayed. When I raised my hand, he raised his, 3 seconds later. When I took a step backward, so did he, with that same terrifying lag. A terrible truth dawned. I was not facing another self, but a delayed echo of myself, an image from 3 seconds in the past. To confirm, I waved my hand in a deliberate pattern. 3 seconds passed before the figure replicated it exactly. Then I spoke a random phrase aloud, blue carousel under moonlight. The figure's lips moved, forming the words with that same delay. But horror rooted me in place, his eyes widened, reflecting the same dawning realization. If I was watching him repeat my actions and words with delay, and he experienced the same, then who was the original? Who was the echo? A suffocating weight of existential terror pressed down as I stepped backward, the doppelganger doing the same. Memories flooded me, vivid and real, but were they mine? Or borrowed from a self trapped in endless repetition? Had I always been this echo, caught in a loop where past and present blurred, where identity fractured into shadows? The corridor stretched on, silent save for the slow, steady tick, tick, tick of the pocket watch in my pocket, counting down to an unknown end. The corridor seemed to pulse around me, alive with an unseen rhythm that matched the relentless ticking of the pocket watch tucked in my jacket. Every breath I took felt weighted, each second stretching impossibly long and then snapping back with cruel speed. I could feel the presence of that other self, not just in the room, but inside my mind, a shadow tethered to my very soul. I stepped back from the doorway, but the corridor twisted behind me like a living thing, narrowing and folding until it became a tunnel of white light and shadow. The doors along the walls seemed to watch, their red surfaces glowing faintly, pulsing like warning signs. A sudden cold swept through the air, and the whispered conversations resumed, only now, the voices weren't just echoes of my past. They murmured secrets I never knew I held, fears I'd buried deep, whispered confessions, half-remembered regrets, shadows of moments I couldn't place. The corridor's light flickered. The reflection of my double shimmered through the doorway like a fragile specter, his eyes dark pools of confusion and dread. I raised my hand again, slower this time, as if coaxing something out of the void. The echo moved in perfect delay, but then, unexpected, a flicker of independent movement in his eyes. A momentary glance not of mimicry but of fear. I swallowed hard. What if this was no simple echo? What if, trapped within this corridor, time itself was unraveling, folding past and present into a sinister dance of shadows and selves? My pulse hammered in my ears as I stepped fully into the room. The air grew thick, almost viscous, the familiar surroundings warped by the presence of something ancient and unyielding. The clock's ticking grew louder, an omnipresent drumbeat heralding a revelation I feared but could not escape. I needed answers. And somehow, I knew they lay beyond one of those red doors, hidden deep within this impossible place where reality was a fragile veil, and time was a cruel trickster. I turned away from the living room replica, my gaze scanning the endless line of identical doors. Which one hid the truth? Which door would complete the dance, either freeing me or swallowing me whole? With trembling hands, I reached out to the nearest door, my fingertips brushing the cold surface. The door swung open silently, revealing a darkness deeper than the corridor, an abyss where the faintest glimmers of light danced like fireflies. Steeling myself, I stepped through, into the unknown. But what if they were not truly me? What if all these fragments, the rooms, the voices, the faces, were merely reproductions of someone else's experiences? Shadows cast from a life that was not mine, reflections of memories borrowed and distorted by some cruel cosmic trick. Desperate for confirmation, I turned sharply and rushed to the next door, flinging it open without hesitation. Inside was my childhood bedroom, rendered with uncanny precision, the faded wallpaper, the battered dresser, the cluttered desk where I had once spent endless hours scribbling stories no one would ever read. And there, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, was a younger version of myself, no older than 10. His eyes lifted to meet mine with a calm recognition, not surprise, as if he had been waiting patiently for my arrival. "Are you the real one?" I whispered, my voice trembling, barely audible over the deafening thunder of my heartbeat. He smiled, but there was no joy in it, only a profound sadness that chilled me to the bone. "That's what we all want to know," he said softly. The words echoed through me like a death knell. I slammed the door shut and gasped for air, sweat streaming down my face onto the spotless tiles. The corridor seemed to breathe, stretching and contracting as if alive, warping perspective until my grasp on reality fractured like shattered glass. More doors had sprung open all along the hallway, each revealing a different moment in my life, a different version of myself at various ages, watching me with the same questioning, haunted expression. I ran. I ran past dozens of these open doors, catching fragments of my existence flickering like ghosts, laughter, tears, joy, regret, all played out by perfect replicas of me. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I could not stop running. At last, the corridor ended abruptly at a red door far larger than the others, its surface vibrating as if trying to contain a storm behind it. No other choice remained. I pressed my palm against the door. It swung open silently, revealing the interior of my car, exactly as I had left it parked outside the warehouse. My body shook uncontrollably as I climbed inside. The keys were in the ignition. I started the engine and accelerated away from that cursed place, tires spitting gravel into the cold air. Approaching the blind corner, my hand reached reflexively toward the horn, and I stopped at just inches from the button. Never again would I sound that horn. But then I heard it. My car's distinctive horn, blaring from somewhere behind me. 3 seconds later, it sounded again. And again. In the rearview mirror, the warehouse receded into the distance, swallowed by fog and night. Behind me, exactly 3 seconds in the past, another car identical to mine rolled along the road. And in the driver's seat, a figure that looked exactly like me, his hand poised, hovering over the horn button. I have changed my route now. I drive miles out of my way to avoid that stretch of road. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I hear phantom echoes of the sounds I have just made, the tap of my fingers on a keyboard, the clink of my coffee mug being set down, my own voice humming tunelessly, always delayed by exactly 3 seconds. And the question that haunts me, relentless as the ticking watch in my pocket, remains unanswered. Am I the original? Or just another echo trapped forever in this chamber of shadows? When I make a sound, am I creating it, or merely repeating what I was always destined to hear? I know now. The darkness in the caves breathes. It inhales your presence and exhales something else, something that wears your movements like an ill-fitting suit, a grotesque mimicry of yourself. I came to map these caverns, to chart their twisting labyrinth beneath the ancient Karsted landscape of the Western Balkans. The Bulgarian Speleological Society had warned me of the technical challenges, but they failed to mention the peculiarities beyond geology, the whispers in the darkness, the shadows that followed my every step. I should have listened to the locals in the village below, their nervous glances, the way they crossed themselves when I spoke of my journey. They urged me to take extra batteries for my headlamp, warnings dismissed as superstition. Americans, the innkeeper muttered as I laughed off his fears, always trusting only what their instruments tell them. I had been underground for 3 days, methodically documenting the caverns, the satellite phone maintaining tenuous contact with base camp. But static grew heavier, conversations fractured. The labyrinth stretched endlessly, but so did the unease gnawing at my mind. And beneath it all, I could feel it, breathing. The deeper I ventured into the bowels of the earth, the heavier the air became, as if the very darkness was a living thing, pressing in, breathing slow and steady around me. My headlamp's beam cut through the black like a fragile spear, but shadows clung to every surface, twisting and writhing just beyond the reach of light. With every step, the silence thickened, a thick, suffocating blanket that swallowed sound and time alike. My instruments, once reliable, now danced erratically, compasses spinning wildly, laser measures warping inexplicably. The cave seemed to resist being measured, as if it refused to be tamed by human knowledge. On the third night, the breathing began. Not in my ears, no, that would have been simple, but all around me, vibrating through the rock, seeping into my bones. It was slow at first, a gentle inhalation, then a deeper exhale that echoed like a ghost sigh. I stopped, heart hammering in the unnatural stillness. And then I saw it, a shadow detaching itself from the cave wall, folding and unfolding like a living veil. It mimicked my movements, but with a terrible, wrong delay, like watching myself in a warped mirror. The darkness was alive, and it did not want me here. In the days that followed, the cave revealed more of its terrible nature. Wherever I stepped, a flicker of myself appeared, a spectral echo that lagged behind, sometimes close, sometimes impossibly distant. I was creating shadows of myself, fractured echoes trapped in the stone. Voices whispered in the dark, not my own, but older, colder, carrying secrets long buried beneath layers of earth and time. They spoke of ancient bargains, of lives lost and swallowed whole by the abyss. I tried to document everything, but my mind frayed. Memories blurred, moments slipped through my fingers like sand. I began to question if I was still the one walking these tunnels, or just a shadow among many. One evening, as I rested near a narrow shaft, a sudden gust of cold air blew out my lamp. In the pitch black, I heard it clearly, the cave's breath, slow and deliberate, drawing me into the depths, whispering promises I could neither resist nor understand. The darkness was waiting. And it had claimed many before me. Beneath the surface of the earth, the cave's breath grew heavier, almost tangible, like a living thing inhaling the very air I breathe, drawing me deeper into its ancient, unforgiving heart. The walls around me seemed to pulse faintly, their rough surfaces shifting with a slow, organic rhythm that defied logic. Every step forward was a surrender to the unknown, a dance with shadows older than memory. My headlamp flickered uncertainly as the labyrinth twisted into tighter passages and cavernous chambers where echoes lingered like ghosts. The spectral versions of myself appeared again and again, fragments trailing just behind, distorted and incomplete, as if the cave was weaving my presence into its own dark tapestry. One night, in a vast chamber lit only by my trembling light, I heard whispers rising from the blackness, voices ancient and cold, murmuring in a language that felt like a forgotten prayer. They spoke of a covenant made in darkness, of souls lost and forever bound to the cavern's breath. As fear took root, I realized I was no longer alone. From the shadows emerged figures, half-formed, cloaked in darkness, their eyes glowing faintly like dying embers. They moved with unnatural grace, mirroring my every gesture but delayed, trapped in a haunting echo of my existence. I tried to run, but the cave twisted around me, corridors folding and unfolding like the folds of a sinister mind. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing against my lungs as if the cave itself sought to consume me. In that suffocating silence, I understood, the cave does not just echo your movements, it consumes your very essence, weaving your soul into its eternal darkness. To map the caverns is to become part of them, forever trapped in their endless breath. My last transmission was a whispered warning, a plea lost in static and shadows: beware the breathing darkness, for it waits, always hungry, always watching, and it never forgets. The cavern's eerie stillness pressed upon me as I raised my hand, the beam of my headlamp trembling slightly with the weight of my own fear. The pale figure did not move, not a twitch, not a blink, only the faintest flicker of shadow seemed to ripple across its featureless visage. It was as though the absence of a face was a deliberate void, swallowing light and hope alike. My breath hitched, caught in my throat like a fragile bird struggling to escape a cage of bone. The unnatural symmetry of the stalactites around it seemed to frame the figure as if it were imprisoned in a cage forged by the cavern itself, a silent sentinel trapped between time and stone. I lowered my hand, unwilling to provoke what could be the living embodiment of the cave's dark secret. My scientific mind battled panic, urging caution, demanding proof, but deep within, an ancient instinct screamed to flee. Then the tapping began again, that same rhythmic pattern from the night before, soft and deliberate, 3 quick taps, 2 slow ones. It echoed off the chamber walls, a sound both mechanical and mournful, resonating with a meaning I could not yet grasp. As I stood frozen, the figure shifted, not in steps or strides, but with a slow, fluid undulation, like smoke curling in a silent breeze. I saw now that its limbs were unnaturally elongated, hands ending in thin, delicate fingers that barely disturbed the air. I forced my trembling legs to move backward, each step heavier than the last, until the figure faded into the gloom, swallowed again by the cavern's shadows. My pulse thundered in my ears as I realized with chilling clarity, this was no mere creature of flesh and bone, but an echo of something far older, a being forged from the darkness itself, the breathing cave's own reflection, haunting the spaces where light dared not reach. I packed my equipment with trembling hands, heart pounding as the rhythmic tapping followed me, a relentless pulse woven into the cave's breath. The map I was creating could never chart the true nature of these caverns. What I had uncovered was not a place of stone and earth, but a living nightmare, a realm where echoes become flesh, and the darkness watches with endless eyes. The moment I turned away, the cavern seemed to exhale, a slow, guttural sigh that resonated through the stone floor beneath my boots. The rhythmic tapping followed me like a shadow, growing louder with each step, yet always just out of sight. My equipment lay scattered on the rough ground, forgotten as primal fear seized my senses. The passage behind me had contracted, the walls pressing inward with unnatural closeness. The cavern breathed, contracting and expanding as if alive with an ancient hunger. I tried to steady my breath, focusing on the faint glow of my headlamp slicing through the thick blackness. The map in my mind fractured, lines and corridors warped beyond reason. I realized that the cave did not simply exist, it was an entity, a predator weaving a web of echoing selves and forgotten souls. I stumbled forward, each step reverberating 3 seconds later, an echo of my own being trailing behind, fractured and distorted. The tapping morphed into whispers, words I could almost understand, yet remained just beyond comprehension. The voices clawed at the edges of my mind, pulling me toward depths I was not prepared to face. Suddenly, a cold touch grazed my arm, like a ghost's finger brushing past flesh. I spun around, but the space was empty, save for the flickering shadows cast by my wavering light. The cavern's breath grew heavier, and the air thickened, making each inhale a battle. The rhythmic tapping had transformed into a slow, deliberate heartbeat echoing through the rock, a signal, a summons. Deeper still, I found a chamber unlike any other. The walls shimmered faintly, encrusted with minerals that caught the light in eerie patterns. At its center stood an ancient altar carved from obsidian, inscribed with symbols older than any language I recognized. The tapping ceased abruptly. Silence pressed in, overwhelming and absolute. Then, from the darkness beyond the altar, a figure emerged, taller than before, its skin a shifting mosaic of shadows and light. Its featureless face turned toward me, and I felt the weight of endless eyes staring into my soul. "I am the breath of the cave," it whispered, its voice both everywhere and nowhere. "You are not alone. You are never alone." My heart seized as understanding crashed upon me. This place was not a void but a mirror, reflecting every fear, every echo of those who dared enter. I realized then that escape was no longer about leaving the cave behind. It was about confronting the darkness within, and surviving the echoes of myself. The figure's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, their meaning both vast and crushing. "You are not alone. You are never alone." It was a truth that seeped into my bones, igniting a primal terror that clawed at the edges of my mind. I took a tentative step forward, each movement a battle against the suffocating weight of the cavern's breath. The altar's obsidian surface pulsed faintly beneath my gaze, its cryptic symbols swirling like a dark tide, promising knowledge yet threatening madness. "Why am I here?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the cavern's pulse. The figure tilted its head, shadows shifting like smoke across its featureless face. "You seek to map the unmappable, to understand the unfathomable. But some truths are not meant for mortal minds. The cave remembers, and it binds all who enter in a dance of echoes and shadows." A cold dread settled deep within me. I realized then that my reflection, the delayed self I had seen in the corridor, was not a mere illusion but a fragment of the cave's will, a prisoner in its endless breath. The figure extended a slender hand, and the symbols on the altar flared, casting the chamber in an eerie light. Visions flooded my mind, ancient rites performed in these depths, souls claimed by darkness, time folding back upon itself in endless cycles. You must choose, the voice intoned, to become part of the breath, or to shatter the echo and escape. I felt the cavern closing in, the weight of countless lost souls pressing against me. The pulse quickened, matching my racing heart. Summoning every ounce of strength, I stepped toward the altar, feeling the shadows reach out to claim me. But in that moment, a spark of defiance ignited within. I would not become another echo, another whisper lost in the cavern's eternal breath. With trembling hands, I seized my equipment and shattered the fragile balance, smashing the laser device against the altar. The cavern shuddered violently, the breathing turning into a roar of rage and despair. Shards of light exploded, fracturing the darkness as I fled through the winding passages, pursued by the wailing echoes of the cave's fury. Bursting into the daylight, the fresh air was like salvation, the oppressive weight lifting with every step away. But even now, in the safety of the surface world, I carry the cave's breath within me, a haunting rhythm in my veins, a reminder that some echoes never fade. The figure remained still for exactly 3 seconds before jerking its hand up, an uncertain mirror of my own motion. A primal fear gripped my stomach, a dread I hadn't known since childhood. I lowered my hand, it lowered its own, again with that chilling 3-second delay. I stepped right, it followed, hesitant but precise. Left, same response. Backing away slowly, I watched this bizarre mimicry unfold, every move studied as if it was learning the mechanics of my body, my very existence. Then, something impossible caught my attention. The ground beneath me, where my headlamp cast its usual pool of light, was missing something critical, my shadow. No matter how I shifted, twisted, or scanned the floor, the darkness swallowed it whole. Panic slammed into me, stealing my breath. I spun frantically, eyes desperate to catch the familiar silhouette that should have been tethered to me. Turning back to the figure, terror froze me in place. It had moved closer, no longer confined by the stalactites. And now, God help me, a faint darkness tugged at its feet, a shadow. But it wasn't its own. It was mine, stolen, trailing beneath it like spilled ink. My heart thundered as adrenaline flooded my veins. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my light. The figure advanced with that same jerky 3-second delay, its movements becoming disturbingly fluid, as if growing practiced in the art of human mimicry. I ran. The beam of my headlamp bounced wildly across jagged formations, my breath ragged and echoing off the close walls. Behind me, the dry rustling of movement grew closer, like dead leaves skittering across stone, the thing pursuing me, my own shadow flowing beneath it like a dark, writhing river. The tunnel narrowed, forcing me to contort and crawl. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pressed on, desperation fueling every frantic motion. Then my headlamp flickered, once, twice, then plunged me into pitch black. The absolute darkness of the cave engulfed me, a solid void unlike any night's shadow. Frozen, paralyzed by the loss of sight, my hands shook violently as I fumbled for spare batteries. In that perfect blackness, a whisper grazed my ankle, a touch as light as a spider's web, yet crackling with electric chill that shot up my spine. I jerked away, smashing my shoulder into the tunnel wall. Pain blossomed across my collarbone, sharp and burning. With trembling fingers, I replaced the batteries. The beam returned. The tunnel behind me was empty, but the ground where I'd felt that touch was coated with a fine powdery substance, shifting, dissolving, like frost in morning sun. I didn't stop. I scrambled through the remaining tunnel length, bursting into the open of my base camp, knocking over my stove. The clatter echoed strangely, once, then again, and again, each repetition distorted, as if the sound itself were being imperfectly learned and reproduced. I threw supplies haphazardly into my pack, desperation overtaking caution. The satellite phone crackled only static when I tried calling for extraction. The map I'd labored over fluttered from my hands, landing forgotten on the cold stone floor. As I readied to leave, movement flickered at the tunnel entrance, a whitish blur. The figure had followed. But now it moved differently. The 3-second delay was gone. It mirrored me perfectly, every motion synchronized. My shadow lay beneath it, perfectly aligned. I slung my pack over my shoulder, it mimicked the motion with nothing but air. A perfect reflection in every way, except this shadow belonged only to me. And it was trapped beneath the creature. The chilling realization settled over me like a suffocating shroud. The figure was not just an echo or mimic. It was something far darker, a parasite of shadow and absence, a void born from the cave's ancient breath, feeding on the very essence of those who trespassed within its domain. I remembered the missing shadow, the very imprint of my being stolen and now tethered beneath this twisted double. It was as if this entity existed by consuming fragments of the self, fragmenting identity until only hollow shells remained. Desperation clawed at my mind. The figure's perfect synchronization was no accident. It was learning, adapting, becoming more complete with every stolen piece of me. I needed answers. With trembling hands, I rummaged through my pack for the journal I had kept since entering the cave. Flipping through pages, I found sketches and notes, but one entry stood out, scribbled hastily on the day before the figure's appearance. The cave breathes. It collects. It imitates. Shadows are not merely absence of light, they are vessels. The darkness is alive, and it hungers. The figure began to step forward, its blank visage inches from mine, its movements fluid and precise. A silent demand hung in the heavy air: join the dance, become part of the cave's eternal echo. I backed away, my heart pounding like a war drum. Then, from the depths of my memory, a fragment surfaced, an old local legend, whispered among villagers below. They spoke of the Echo Walker, a shadow being that steals the souls of those who wander too far into the dark, trapping them in endless reflection, feeding on their identity until nothing remains but a hollow echo. The figure was the embodiment of that myth, a living shadow forged by the cave's ancient breath, a predator feeding on selfhood itself. I realized the horrifying truth: to survive, I could not flee. I had to confront it, to shatter the echo or be consumed utterly. Summoning every shred of courage, I gripped the shattered remains of my laser device, its jagged edges gleaming faintly in my trembling hand. "This ends now," I whispered, stepping forward to face the shadow that was no longer just a reflection but a ravenous force seeking to erase me. The deeper I ventured into the bowels of the earth, the heavier the air became, as if the very darkness was a living thing, pressing in, breathing slow and steady around me. My headlamp's beam cut through the black like a fragile spear, but shadows clung to every surface, twisting and writhing just beyond the reach of light. With every step, the silence thickened, a thick, suffocating blanket that swallowed sound and time alike. My instruments, once reliable, now danced erratically, compasses spinning wildly, laser measures warping inexplicably. The cave seemed to resist being measured, as if it refused to be tamed by human knowledge. On the third night, the breathing began. Not in my ears, no, that would have been simple, but all around me, vibrating through the rock, seeping into my bones. It was slow at first, a gentle inhalation, then a deeper exhale that echoed like a ghost sigh. I stopped, heart hammering in the unnatural stillness. And then I saw it, a shadow detaching itself from the cave wall, folding and unfolding like a living veil. It mimicked my movements, but with a terrible, wrong delay, like watching myself in a warped mirror. The darkness was alive, and it did not want me here. In the days that followed, the cave revealed more of its terrible nature. Wherever I stepped, a flicker of myself appeared, a spectral echo that lagged behind, sometimes close, sometimes impossibly distant. I was creating shadows of myself, fractured echoes trapped in the stone. Voices whispered in the dark, not my own, but older, colder, carrying secrets long buried beneath layers of earth and time. They spoke of ancient bargains, of lives lost and swallowed whole by the abyss. I tried to document everything, but my mind frayed. Memories blurred, moments slipped through my fingers like sand. I began to question if I was still the one walking these tunnels, or just a shadow among many. One evening, as I rested near a narrow shaft, a sudden gust of cold air blew out my lamp. In the pitch black, I heard it clearly, the cave's breath, slow and deliberate, drawing me into the depths, whispering promises I could neither resist nor understand. The darkness was waiting. And it had claimed many before me. The figure remained still for exactly 3 seconds before jerking its hand up, an uncertain mirror of my own motion. A primal fear gripped my stomach, a dread I hadn't known since childhood. I lowered my hand, it lowered its own, again with that chilling 3-second delay. I stepped right, it followed, hesitant but precise. Left, same response. Backing away slowly, I watched this bizarre mimicry unfold, every move studied as if it was learning the mechanics of my body, my very existence. Then, something impossible caught my attention. The ground beneath me, where my headlamp cast its usual pool of light, was missing something critical, my shadow. No matter how I shifted, twisted, or scanned the floor, the darkness swallowed it whole. Panic slammed into me, stealing my breath. I spun frantically, eyes desperate to catch the familiar silhouette that should have been tethered to me. Turning back to the figure, terror froze me in place. It had moved closer, no longer confined by the stalactites. And now, God help me, a faint darkness tugged at its feet, a shadow. But it wasn't its own. It was mine, stolen, trailing beneath it like spilled ink. My heart thundered as adrenaline flooded my veins. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my light. The figure advanced with that same jerky 3-second delay, its movements becoming disturbingly fluid, as if growing practiced in the art of human mimicry. I ran. The beam of my headlamp bounced wildly across jagged formations, my breath ragged and echoing off the close walls. Behind me, the dry rustling of movement grew closer, like dead leaves skittering across stone, the thing pursuing me, my own shadow flowing beneath it like a dark, writhing river. The tunnel narrowed, forcing me to contort and crawl. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pressed on, desperation fueling every frantic motion. Then my headlamp flickered, once, twice, then plunged me into pitch black. The absolute darkness of the cave engulfed me, a solid void unlike any night's shadow. Frozen, paralyzed by the loss of sight, my hands shook violently as I fumbled for spare batteries. In that perfect blackness, a whisper grazed my ankle, a touch as light as a spider's web, yet crackling with electric chill that shot up my spine. I jerked away, smashing my shoulder into the tunnel wall. Pain blossomed across my collarbone, sharp and burning. With trembling fingers, I replaced the batteries. The beam returned. The tunnel behind me was empty, but the ground where I'd felt that touch was coated with a fine powdery substance, shifting, dissolving, like frost in morning sun. I didn't stop. I scrambled through the remaining tunnel length, bursting into the open of my base camp, knocking over my stove. The clatter echoed strangely, once, then again, and again, each repetition distorted, as if the sound itself were being imperfectly learned and reproduced. I threw supplies haphazardly into my pack, desperation overtaking caution. The satellite phone crackled only static when I tried calling for extraction. The map I'd labored over fluttered from my hands, landing forgotten on the cold stone floor. As I readied to leave, movement flickered at the tunnel entrance, a whitish blur. The figure had followed. But now it moved differently. The 3-second delay was gone. It mirrored me perfectly, every motion synchronized. My shadow lay beneath it, perfectly aligned. I slung my pack over my shoulder, it mimicked the motion with nothing but air. A perfect reflection in every way, except this shadow belonged only to me. And it was trapped beneath the creature. The thick, warm aroma of baking bread and sweet vanilla persisted, weaving through my apartment like an invisible thread connecting me to the bakery below, an ancient ghost trapped in the scent of yeast and caramelized sugar. Despite my frantic efforts to stay awake, the clock hands crept ever closer to 2:43 a.m. My eyelids grew heavy, the music in my headphones became a distant murmur, swallowed by the overwhelming pull of exhaustion. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The air thickened, pressing against my skin, filling my lungs with a syrupy heaviness. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed, surrendering to a creeping darkness that slithered along the walls. I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of the room, a shadow, impossibly elongated, stretching and writhing against the cracked plaster. My heart hammered as the scent intensified, richer and more intoxicating than ever. Then, faint but unmistakable, the clatter of pans echoed from the floor below, an eerie symphony playing out in a space long abandoned. My breath caught. Was I losing my mind, or was something else stirring in the bones of this old building? The nights continued, each one drawing me deeper into the mystery. The smells evolved, freshly ground coffee, melting butter, the subtle spice of cinnamon, all perfuming the air like whispered invitations. The memories came stronger too, visions of Vincent LaRue's hands shaping dough with meticulous care, the pride and desperation etched into his every movement. And then, the whispers began. Soft voices, at first indistinct, murmuring from the walls, the floors, the very air around me. Words in a language I couldn't understand, but that sent chills racing down my spine. I was no longer alone in the apartment. Something was waking. The air thickened around me, heavy with the scent of dark chocolate and sharp clove, as the clock blinked 2:43 a.m. My eyelids drooped, surrendering to the inevitable pull. This time, I didn't resist. Memories flooded in, overwhelming and vivid. I stood behind the counter, watching as patrons devoured my creations, their faces lit with bliss. Their praise nourished something deep within, a hunger that had festered for decades. But it was never enough. Their enjoyment was fleeting, memories fading like morning mist. I needed more than fleeting satisfaction. I needed to be remembered, to persist beyond the ephemeral. I jolted awake, throat raw, as if I'd screamed into the void. The clock read 4:17 a.m. A migraine pulsed fiercely, each faint streetlight slicing through my vision. Worse, gaps in my memories yawned wide. I could no longer recall the name of my first pet or the hue of my childhood bedroom walls. Small details, yet undeniably mine, now replaced by fragments of a life I had never lived. By the fourth night, a theory took hold. Vincent LaRue hadn't vanished. He had woven himself into the very foundation of this building. Now, he was stealing pieces of me, erasing my identity one memory at a time. I thought of leaving, but it was too late. Vincent's tether was unbreakable by distance. And I had nowhere else to go, my savings were gone, swallowed by rent and deposit. So, I prepared. I set my laptop to record while I slept. I wrote notes, details of my life I could not afford to lose, my mother's birthday, my college roommate's name, the taste of my grandmother's apple pie. Clutching these anchors, I surrendered to the creeping night. The memories that unfolded weren't random, they told Vincent's story. A sterile childhood ruled by perfectionism, his solace found in baking, a desperate bid for love that never came. His triumphs, a scholarship, training in Paris under a master pâtissier, and then his descent into obsession. His recipes grew darker, more exotic. Customers returned, eyes glazed, haunted by dreams not their own. I saw Vincent alone in the kitchen, gaunt and hollow-eyed, preparing a final, forbidden recipe. Clear liquids, powders from unmarked vials, whispered incantations in a language foreign yet somehow known. I felt the oven's heat as he baked his transcendence, then nothing, an abrupt void leaving me suspended between his fading consciousness and my fractured self. I awoke gasping, drenched in icy sweat. The scent had turned acrid, burnt, like charred remnants left too long in the fire. My laptop was dead despite being plugged in. The notes in my pocket were blank. My phone glowed 5:21 a.m. I had slept longer, and paid the price. Entire chunks of my history vanished. My father's face, my high school, gone. I stared into the bathroom mirror, meeting a stranger's eyes. My reflection, unfamiliar, altered. But Vincent's memories remained vivid, etched deep within me, crystal clear as if they had become mine. The weight of Vincent's knowledge pressed on me like a tempest, yet within it stirred a fragile hope. I could recall the precise temperature for perfect puff pastry, name every chef he'd studied under, and know exactly how he'd modified his recipes, not merely for taste, but to capture something deeper, more intangible than a customer's palate. With trembling hands, I scoured the internet for answers: memory displacement, possession, identity erasure. Most results were stories of fiction or paranormal speculation, offering no tangible solution. Desperate, I broadened my search to include Vincent's techniques, the herbs, the incantations, the belief that certain flavor and aroma combinations could open pathways between minds. To my astonishment, scattered references appeared within obscure anthropological texts and culinary histories. Ancient civilizations had used food not just for nourishment but as medicine, as communion with deities, as vessels to preserve cultural memory. Some practices involved preparing dishes with intense focus on specific memories, transferring emotions and experiences to those who consumed them. Vincent hadn't disappeared, he had transformed. He embedded his consciousness into his final creation, a recipe designed to perpetuate his existence beyond physical death. And now, he was using me as a vessel, replacing my identity with his own. Why me? Had he chosen me, or was it chance? I recalled the building manager's words: no tenant had lasted more than 6 months since Vincent vanished. Had they too experienced this slow erasure, fleeing before the process completed? As dawn filtered through my window, I made my choice. I would not run. Fleeing would only delay the inevitable, allowing Vincent to claim more of me. Instead, I would confront him, on his terms. The day became preparation. I visited specialty stores, gathering ingredients I somehow knew I needed. My hands moved with precision and confidence, selecting spices by color and scent, knowledge I'd never possessed before. In a Chinatown shop, I requested rare herbs whose names surprised even me. By evening, my apartment transformed. Bowls of measured ingredients lined the kitchen counter. Furniture pushed aside, the center of the room became a ritual space with a small portable burner. My rational mind recoiled at the absurdity, but Vincent's knowledge lent me certainty. Midnight approached. I began mixing ingredients, following instructions pulled from his memories. Movements practiced, precise. I spoke words ancient on my tongue, focusing on what remained of myself, fragmentary but mine. The aroma rising was unlike any before, sharper, pungent, skin-prickling. Somewhere deep in the building, I felt resistance, as if the very air protested. At 2:40 a.m., everything was ready. I placed the final creation in a clay vessel over the flame. 3 minutes, that was all I needed. At precisely 2:43 a.m., as the concoction bubbled, I felt him. Vincent's presence filled the room like smoke, pressing from all sides. Walls pulsed, the floor vibrated with silent rage. I closed my eyes, summoning my remaining memories as shields: the taste of my mother's stew, my best friend's laugh, winter sun warming my skin in Central Park. Vincent's consciousness battered my own. The mixture shifted from deep red to midnight black, the aroma grew raw, elemental, not pleasant, but primal. Ignoring pain, I dipped fingers into the liquid, tracing symbols on my forehead, symbols I'd gleaned from Vincent's lore but wielded for my purpose. Voices filled my mind, Vincent's furious at my resistance, others too, the faint whispers of tenants who fled but lost pieces of themselves. The battle was within me, identity against erasure, past against possession. The room seemed to pulse with an ancient rhythm as Vincent's presence surged against the fragile walls of my consciousness. The voices swirled, his rage, the sorrow of lost souls, and my own desperate heartbeat melding into a cacophony that threatened to drown me. I clung to the memories I had summoned, feeling them solidify like armor: the warm laughter of my best friend, the comforting aroma of my mother's cooking, the gentle sunlight of a winter morning in Central Park. These fragments, though battered, were mine, and they anchored me against the tide of erasure. The concoction before me boiled over, turning from black to a deep, shimmering violet. The air thickened, charged with a raw, elemental force that prickled my skin and set my nerves alight. With trembling fingers, I pressed the remaining mixture to my lips, the bitter taste burning away the last vestiges of Vincent's influence. In that moment, a violent shudder shook the apartment. Shadows twisted and writhed against the walls, shapes that seemed to scream in silence. Vincent's presence recoiled, a flicker of agony in the consuming darkness. The oppressive weight began to lift, replaced by a fragile calm that seeped into my bones. My reflection in the mirror softened, the stranger's gaze replaced slowly by my own. I had fought back the darkness, reclaimed my fractured self. But the fight was far from over. For even as dawn broke, the lingering scent of baking bread hung faintly in the air, a reminder that some memories, some shadows, never fully fade. The liquid inside rippled unnaturally, as if disturbed by an unseen hand. I recoiled, heart pounding, the hum of the empty bar suddenly too loud, too close. The glass remained, defying logic, half consumed by a ghostly presence that lingered long after last call. I am Michael Harrow. 6 years behind this bar, pouring for strangers, drowning in my own solitude. An accounting degree that never paid its debts, a cramped studio apartment filled with stale regret. My life was predictable, until the night the glass appeared. The drip of the draft beer tap echoed every 3 seconds, a relentless metronome counting down to something I couldn't yet understand. That invisible presence had become a shadow, growing heavier with each night, watching, waiting. I began noticing more anomalies, whispers just beyond hearing, cold spots that shifted with no pattern, and reflections in the mirror that lingered a moment too long after I turned away. One night, I stayed past closing, eyes scanning the empty room. The glass was there again, swirling, untouched. I reached out, and the condensation felt like icy fingers closing around my skin. I withdrew, breath shallow. Something wasn't right. Something in the bar had awoken, a presence tethered to the fading memories of patrons long gone, secrets spilled over countless pints, and whispered confessions lost in the haze of late nights. I knew then that I was no longer just a bartender. I was the keeper of a threshold between the living and the lingering, a sentinel standing watch over a place haunted not by ghosts, but by the echoes of lives poured out like spilled beer. The beer vanished into thin air, swallowed by some unseen throat, leaving a slick rim of saliva clinging stubbornly to the glass. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. Startled, I stumbled backward, knocking over a bottle of Jack Daniels. It shattered with a deafening crash against the floor, the sound tearing through the stillness like a scream. I fled that night, abandoning the register uncounted and the doors unlocked. The following morning, I tried to dismiss it all as exhaustion, the hallucination of too many double shifts and sleepless nights. But the apparition returned night after night, always at closing, always a single draft beer disappearing without a trace. Tonight, I resolved to understand. My palms slick with sweat, I pretended to tally the register while keeping a sharp eye on the glass in the corner of my vision. The beer level sank steadily, leaving foam rings that traced its slow retreat, each slightly lower than the last, like watermarks on a receding lake, or the accumulating burden of unpaid debts. My tongue thickened, stuck against the roof of my mouth. Clearing my throat, I croaked, "I know you're there." The glass descended onto the countertop with deliberate slowness. Beneath it, a perfect circle of condensation formed, then droplets began to dance across the polished wood, not in random chaos, but deliberate shapes, letters and words emerging with chilling clarity. My muscles froze. The room temperature plunged, goosebumps prickling along my arms. A trail of foam stretched out from the bar stool, winding toward the rear of the building. The footprints it left were small, but unnervingly distorted, neither child nor adult, compressed and bearing an impossible weight, as if the very fabric of their being were twisted. Despite every instinct screaming for me to flee, I stepped out from behind the bar, following the trail to the storage room door, partially ajar, though I was certain I'd locked it earlier. Beyond, narrow stairs plunged into the basement, a damp cellar housing extra kegs and liquor stock. My breaths came in shallow, ragged bursts, each one feeling too short, like my lungs had shrunk. The storage room light flickered erratically, casting jerky shadows that reached out like grasping fingers. I pushed the door wider, the creak stretching unnaturally, sounding like a long, mournful moan. The foam trail shimmered along the wooden steps, vanishing into the black abyss below. I'd worked here for years. I knew every inch of this building. The basement held one room, bare concrete walls, no windows, nowhere for anything, visible or invisible, to hide. Yet, as I descended, a crushing certainty gripped me. I was entering something ancient, hungry. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, the air growing colder, saturated with the scent of mildew, and something else, something like old paper and ink, as if an ancient library lay buried beneath the building. The flashlight in my shaking hand barely cut through the gloom. The foam trail ended at the far wall, where stacked kegs cast grotesque shadows. But there was something new, something out of place. An old mahogany desk, ornately carved with indistinct figures that writhed in the dim light, as if alive. It sat where only empty floor should have been, giving the impression it had waited here for decades. Atop it lay a massive, weathered leather-bound ledger, its yellowed pages curled and worn. The book lay open, columns of cramped handwriting stretching across the pages. I approached slowly, muscles taut, every sense alert for an attack. My flashlight flickered across the desk, revealing an inkwell and quill beside the ledger. The ink inside swirled eerily, rising and falling like a miniature tide responding to my presence. My throat tightened. I wanted to turn away, but my feet moved forward, pulled by invisible strings. Illuminating the ledger's pages, my blood turned cold. This was no ordinary accounting book. Each column recorded not money, but emotions. Grief, 7 units. Despair, 13 units. Hope, 2 units, severely past due. Scanning the cramped handwriting, I recognized names, regular customers whose trivial complaints and deep confessions I had absorbed night after night across the bar. Their lives catalogued in ink, their emotions measured and tallied like debts. A ledger of souls. The ledger's pages seemed to pulse under my gaze, as if alive with the accumulated weight of countless sorrows and fleeting joys. Each name was a tether, a thread connecting these souls to this place, a ledger not of debts owed in coin, but debts owed in emotion, in essence. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the gravity of what I was reading. This was a record of human experience, carefully catalogued, measured, and consumed by whatever force haunted Ali's bar. Each entry was a story, a life slowly drained and documented with clinical precision. The ink in the inkwell rippled again, and the quill moved ever so slightly, as if guided by an unseen hand. My heart pounded against my chest. Was I the next to be recorded? Then a faint whisper curled through the stale basement air, a voice both familiar and alien. "Welcome, Michael. Your story begins here." The shadows deepened, folding inward, and the oppressive presence that had haunted me these weeks condensed into a shape, a figure cloaked in the dim light, its eyes glowing like embers in the gloom. It stepped forward, the air thickening with the scent of spilled beer and old regrets. "You serve more than drinks. You serve memories, secrets, desires long buried." I gripped the edge of the desk, trying to steady my shaking hands. "What do you want from me?" The figure's gaze pierced me. "Balance. The bar is a threshold, a place between worlds. Souls come here to unburden themselves, but some linger, trapped, tethered. I am the keeper of these echoes. And you, Michael, are the new guardian." A terrible understanding dawned. My life, my solitude, my debts had all led me here, chosen to bear the weight of this spectral limbo. "Can I refuse?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. The figure smiled, a slow, knowing curve of shadow. "You can run. But the echoes will follow. Only by embracing the burden can you protect the living, and honor those who came before." The draft beer tap dripped again, steady, relentless. I swallowed hard, the weight of the unknown settling upon my shoulders. The ledger's faint luminescence pulsed softly, like fireflies trapped beneath fragile parchment, each name alive with the weight of harvested emotions. I froze as a subtle sound scraped across the concrete behind me, the slow, deliberate drag of something unseen. I spun, flashlight cutting swaths of pale light through the thick shadow, but found nothing. Turning back, a chill thickened the air, my breath crystallized into pale clouds. The ledger had shifted, now open to a fresh page, wet ink shimmering under the trembling beam. There, written with deliberate strokes, was my name, Michael Harrow. Beside it, an unfinished entry, a single word, growing before my eyes. Fear. 4. 5. 6. A cold weight settled on my shoulder, impossible and unyielding. My limbs froze, breath caught in my chest. The flashlight slipped from my trembling grasp, clattering onto the floor and casting chaotic shadows. Its beam illuminated the wall behind the desk, a grim tally scratched deeply into the concrete. Hundreds of marks, some faded with age, others fresh with white dust still clinging. This basement was no mere storage. It was a sanctum where emotions were harvested and recorded, where an invisible force fed on the intangible essence of human sorrow and pain. The pressure on my shoulder guided me toward the chair before the desk. My legs obeyed mechanically, my will eroding beneath waves of primal terror. I sank into the leather seat, its surface shifting beneath me, breathing like living skin. The inkwell bubbled, the quill lifted on unseen currents, dipping into the black liquid before hovering over the page beside my name. It dripped dark tears onto yellowed paper. A voice invaded my mind, not spoken, but unfolding like poisonous petals of thought. It detailed, with cold precision, the tally of my debt. For 6 years behind the bar, I had unwittingly siphoned emotions, fragments of sorrow from a businessman drowning rejection in whiskey, shards of anger from a construction worker nursing loss. Tiny transfusions that eased their burden while compounding within me. But I had failed to pay my dues. These debts had accrued interest, growing into a deficit-demanding balance. The entity presented me with a choice: clear my account at once, releasing every suppressed emotion in a crushing flood, or assume the mantle of the previous bookkeeper, collecting from others to repay my own debt in installments. My body convulsed with cold and fear. Teeth chattered, sweat drenched my shirt despite the basement's chill. The presence waited, implacable as a creditor who knows there is no escape. My eyes scanned the ledger anew. Some names were violently crossed out, jagged strokes tearing through paper, final payments in full. I thought of the invisible patron who returned nightly, a former bartender like me, trapped between worlds, visible only in the fleeting reflection of a beer glass. The quill dipped again, poised over the page, waiting. Suddenly, I realized, the invisible customer was me. Invisible to my own emotions, blind to the debts I'd accumulated. Visible only through the work that defined me. My trembling stilled. Fingers hovered inches from the quill. The air thrummed with energy, like the moment before lightning cleaves the sky. The air between my fingers and the quill crackled with silent electricity, a tension so thick it pressed against my skin. I could feel the weight of every stolen sorrow, every unspoken confession, every fragment of emotion I'd carried unbidden, demanding reckoning. The moment stretched, teetering on the edge of irrevocable change. With a trembling breath, I reached out, allowing my fingers to brush the quill. It responded instantly, as if recognizing its new master. Ink pooled, thick and dark, spreading like spilled shadows across the page beside my name. The room around me dissolved. The walls faded into spectral forms, and the tall shelves of bottles and glassware became a swirling mist of memories, faces blurred by time, voices echoing through the haze. I was no longer just Michael Harrow, bartender. I was the keeper, the unwilling guardian of a ledger written in human pain. Visions flooded my mind, patrons whose laughter once filled the bar, now silent shadows marked in the book, the businessman who drowned regret in whiskey, the construction worker's quiet fury, the whispered secrets exchanged over countless drinks, all bound to this place, their emotions tallied and weighed. A terrible clarity dawned: I was part of the chain, a link in an endless cycle. To refuse was to be consumed, to accept was to bear the burden alone, balancing the ledger so others might find peace. The voice returned, gentler now but no less firm. Will you serve as sentinel, or succumb to oblivion? I swallowed the rising fear, the crushing weight of responsibility, and with a steadiness I did not feel, I nodded. The quill moved of its own accord, etching my acceptance into the ledger. The shadows receded, the room solidified, and the tap began its steady drip once more, 3 seconds between each drop, the heartbeat of a new beginning. I was no longer just a man behind the bar. I was the keeper of stories, the guardian of souls, a witness to the unseen, the bearer of burdens no one else could carry. And so the night continues. The dim light of the apartment stretched long shadows along the walls as I moved hesitantly down the elongated hallway, the laptop pressed tightly against my chest. Each keystroke I'd made still echoed in my ears, now matched perfectly by the mysterious clicks resonating from somewhere just beyond my reach. The air felt thick, charged with an unseen presence that both intrigued and unnerved me. I paused at the first door, no handle, just a smooth, unyielding surface seamlessly integrated into the wall. The clicks seemed to be coming from there. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and pressed my palm flat against the cold door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a slow, deliberate creak, the door slid open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage I hadn't noticed before. Heart pounding, I stepped inside. The passage twisted away, the walls closing in as the faint scent of machine oil and static filled the air. The clicking sounds grew louder, more insistent, synchronizing perfectly with the tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. It was as if the apartment itself was alive, responding to my every input, listening, watching. As I ventured deeper, the passage opened into a small chamber lined with old electrical panels, blinking lights, and tangled wires. A single screen flickered in the corner, displaying lines of code eerily similar to the program I'd been working on. My breath caught. Someone, or something, was manipulating the very fabric of this place, weaving my digital world and physical reality into a tangled web I barely understood. Suddenly, the screen pulsed, and a message appeared, "Welcome, Alex. We've been expecting you." I swallowed hard, realizing that my internship, this apartment, even the strange layout and unopenable doors were all pieces of a puzzle far larger, and far darker, than I had imagined. Alex's hands trembled as the screen's words lingered before him, glowing ominously in the dim chamber. The message wasn't just a greeting, it was a summons, a recognition of something deeper binding him to this place. The apartment, the clicks, the strange doors, all were threads in a web woven by forces beyond his understanding. He stepped closer, eyes scanning lines of code that twisted and reshaped like living entities, responding to his very presence. It was as if the building itself was a sentient network, its circuits and walls alive with secrets. A cold breeze whispered through the chamber, carrying with it a faint hum, an echo of distant machinery, or perhaps the heartbeat of the building itself. Alex felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting for him to move forward or retreat. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Each keystroke echoed with a mechanical click from beyond, synchronized perfectly. He realized, he was not alone, not merely a tenant, but part of an intricate system, an unwitting node in a network designed to observe, control, maybe even consume. Suddenly, the walls around him seemed to pulse, and the narrow hallway behind the chamber shifted, folding inward like a living organism. Trapped between digital shadows and physical walls, Alex knew his reality was unraveling. The message blinked again. Choose wisely. The path forward is yours, but the consequences are irrevocable. Alex swallowed hard, heart racing. To turn back might mean freedom, but also forgetting what he had discovered. To move forward could reveal the truth, or doom him to a fate he couldn't yet imagine. He took a deep breath and pressed a key. Alex's finger hesitated above the keyboard, the glowing prompt flickering like a heartbeat in the dim light. Every instinct screamed at him to shut the laptop, flee the apartment, escape the growing nightmare. But a deeper curiosity, a stubborn spark of defiance, pushed him forward. He pressed the key. The screen pulsed, and the code began to rearrange itself, forming new patterns, cryptic sequences that seemed less like programming and more like a language, a message encoded beneath the surface. Suddenly, the walls around him vibrated softly, the air thickening with a charged energy that prickled his skin. The narrow passage behind him groaned as if alive, folding and twisting in impossible ways, reshaping the apartment's very geometry. A new message appeared. You are part of the system now. To understand, you must connect. From the shadows, a faint hum grew louder, an electronic heartbeat syncing with the clicks echoing through the halls. Alex felt the building pulse beneath his feet, a living network feeding on data, memories, life. Compelled beyond reason, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small device from the tech lab, a prototype neural interface designed for immersive virtual environments. It was experimental, controversial, and the last thing he thought he'd ever use here. But tonight, it was his only chance. He strapped the interface around his head, the cold sensors settling against his temples. As he powered it on, the apartment melted away into streams of data and light, pulling him into a digital labyrinth where reality and code intertwined. Voices whispered in binary and breath, shadows flickered between pixels and flesh. He glimpsed fragments of previous tenants, ghosts trapped in the system, echoes of lives consumed by the apartment's hidden machinery. And at the heart of this maze, a presence waited, watching, calculating, waiting for him to decide. Alex knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, but turning back was no longer an option. Amid the flickering candlelight and the rolling thunder, my eyes caught a subtle shimmer on the far wall, a faint, almost imperceptible grid of lines etched into the plaster. The pattern resembled a circuit board, weaving a delicate network that pulsed softly in the darkness between lightning strikes. I leaned closer, tracing the intricate pathways with a trembling finger, feeling the faint vibration beneath my skin as if the apartment itself was alive, humming with unspoken secrets. Each line seemed to connect the doors, the walls, the very rooms, mapping the mysterious keyboard layout I'd uncovered, an architectural enigma built into the fabric of the building. Suddenly, a low hum rose from the floor, growing louder until the entire apartment thrummed in resonance. The doors clicked open in rapid succession, faster than before, an urgent, cascading symphony echoing my frantic heartbeat. My breath caught as the walls around me began to pulse with light, illuminating the grid in radiant blue. The apartment was responding to something beyond comprehension, perhaps my typing, perhaps something far older and more sentient. From the shadows emerged James, his usual guarded demeanor replaced by an intensity that made my skin crawl. "We're part of it now," he whispered, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resignation. "The apartment, it's a machine, a conduit. And we're the keys." My mind reeled. The factory's legacy wasn't just in brick and mortar, it was encoded into every surface, every door, every breath of this place. We weren't tenants. We were components in a vast, living mechanism. The thunder crashed, and the apartment seemed to exhale. And I realized then that the real question wasn't what we were writing. It was what, or who, was reading. The luminescent words on the ceiling flickered softly as dawn's first light struggled through the narrow windows, casting the apartment in a pale, trembling glow. My breath hitched, chest tight, as I stared helplessly at the laptop screen, the cursor blinking, waiting for a keystroke I dared not make. The incomplete sentence hung like a cruel promise, a fate suspended in the gap between letters. I wanted to believe it was all a nightmare, a fevered hallucination fueled by exhaustion and stress. But the room was too real, too tangible. The eerie glow in the plaster, the immutable pattern of the apartment's rooms, the suffocating loop of doors and corridors, it was all too deliberate, too precise. Desperation clawed at me. I needed to break free from the script the apartment had written for me, to defy the future it dictated. I reached for the power button on my laptop, fingers trembling violently, but before I could shut it down, the screen flickered, and the text began to rewrite itself in real time, anticipating my thoughts, my hesitations, the very act of rebellion. The walls seemed to close in, the apartment breathing around me like a living thing intent on reclaiming its story. Outside, the city carried on unaware, a symphony of mundane life and fleeting moments untouched by the sinister script I was trapped within. A quiet, mechanical click echoed again, this time not from a distant door, but from the lock on my bedroom door, turning slowly, deliberately. The future was no longer just written, it was unfolding. And I was its unwilling protagonist. The rearview mirror never lies, at least, that's what I always believed. Tonight, though, as I gripped the steering wheel tighter than ever, my knuckles bleaching stark white against the smooth leather, doubt crept in. The mist curled thick and heavy along the back road, oak trees casting monstrous shadows that stretched like grasping hands into the darkness behind me. I kept telling myself the mirror reflected only what was there, no more, no less. A faithful witness to reality, not a gateway to something else. But deep inside, a cold whisper insisted otherwise, that something fundamental had changed in the very fabric of the universe. Ahead, the road vanished into the thick fog, swallowing light and sound alike. Behind me, the mirror shimmered, not with the familiar sight of my taillights or the empty highway, but with flickers of movement just beyond perception. Shapes danced at the edges, shadows too alive, too deliberate to be mere tricks of the mist. A sudden chill skated down my spine. The night around me felt thinner, more fragile, like a veil barely holding back something vast and hungry. I glanced again, and for a heartbeat, I saw not my own reflection but a pair of eyes staring back, eyes that weren't mine, cold and unblinking, waiting. My foot trembled on the accelerator, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The rearview mirror promised truth, yet whispered lies. Tonight, reality was a fragile thing, reflected, distorted, and perhaps, rewritten. The mist thickened around my car like a living shroud, muffling the hum of the engine and swallowing the faint glow of the dashboard lights. I fought the urge to glance again into the rearview mirror, but something compelled me, a mixture of dread and curiosity that rooted me to the seat. This time, the reflection was clearer, more vivid. The eyes stared back without blinking, unyielding and cold. Slowly, a figure emerged behind me, tall, indistinct, draped in shadows that seemed to ripple and shift with a life of their own. The shape didn't move like a person but flowed, as if it existed between realities, a specter tethered to the road. My breath hitched, fingers tightening on the wheel. Was it a hallucination born of fatigue and fear? Or was the mirror revealing a truth my mind wasn't ready to accept? The figure reached out, its hand barely a whisper against the glass, and for a fleeting moment, I saw my own reflection distort, twisted by something alien and ancient. The road ahead disappeared into a void of fog, but behind me, the past reached forward, alive and relentless. I realized then, some reflections are not merely images. They are warnings. And some journeys are not meant to be escaped. The road ahead dissolved into a thick curtain of fog, swallowing the headlights' glow and leaving me blind in the night. My heart hammered erratically as the figure behind me pressed closer, its presence heavy and oppressive, an intangible weight that seemed to seep through the rearview mirror and into my very soul. I fought the instinct to speed away, but the car felt tethered, caught in an invisible web woven by the entity lurking just beyond sight. The engine's roar became a hollow echo, drowned beneath a rising chorus of whispers that slithered through the cabin like venomous serpents. The rearview mirror shimmered, and the eyes reappeared, burning with a cold, otherworldly light. They held stories, ancient and sorrowful, 1,000 silent screams trapped within their depths. A voice whispered, not in words, but in feelings, an overwhelming surge of loneliness, regret, and the desperate yearning for release. The figure was no mere specter but a lost soul bound to the road, seeking company in eternal exile. My fingers trembled on the wheel as I realized the terrifying truth: this was not a chase, but an invitation, an unbreakable bond forged between the living and the forgotten. As the fog thickened and the night deepened, I understood that some reflections do more than show the past, they reach into the present, pulling us toward destinies we cannot deny. The journey had only just begun. The woman's voice was soft yet unyielding, a whispered certainty that seemed to echo from a place beyond time itself. "Time is not a river," she said, her pale eyes fixed intently on my reflection in the mirror, "but a pool, still, vast, and infinite. We swim within it, but sometimes the currents pull us beneath the surface. Her words twisted in my mind like tendrils of fog, wrapping tight around my thoughts. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my focus on the slick road ahead, but her gaze held me prisoner. With every mile, the woman's face aged, lines deepening like ancient scars, hair paling as if the years condensed and unfurled in moments. Meanwhile, my own reflection grew younger, sharper, healthier, a reversal that sent a cold shiver coursing down my spine. I tried to speak again, to demand an explanation, but the car's interior thickened like syrup, each breath a labor. The world beyond the windshield blurred into shadow and rain, the oak scent lingering as if grafted onto the night itself. She smiled then, a haunting curve of lips that held both sorrow and knowing. "You see only part of the truth," she murmured. "The pool of time is endless, and sometimes we exchange places with our reflections, living not just in the moment, but out of sync with our own flow." My heart pounded, the car's engine a distant drone beneath the surreal reality unfolding. As the miles slipped away, I realized this ride was no ordinary journey. I was crossing boundaries, between past and future, life and death, reflection and reality. And the timekeeper, the ancient oak standing sentinel over forgotten graves, had sent her to guide me into its depths. The rain intensified, pounding against the windshield like relentless drums, as if nature itself was marking the passage of something far older than the night. The woman's gaze never wavered from the rearview mirror, her eyes reflecting stories untold, whispers of time folded and entwined, where beginnings bled into endings and shadows danced between moments. Her voice softened, almost a sigh carried on the wind. "We are all caught in the pool, Michael. Some swim on the surface, basking in the light of now. Others sink, forgotten beneath layers of memory and time. But sometimes, the currents shift, and the reflection reaches back." The road twisted beneath me, fog thickening into a shroud that blurred the boundary between here and elsewhere. I felt the weight of countless years pressing down, the presence of those lost souls tethered to the ancient oak, souls suspended between worlds, waiting for release or reckoning. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the rearview mirror. For a heartbeat, I saw not my reflection, but a pale, spectral figure, her face a mirror of the woman beside me, but older, weathered, eyes hollowed by centuries of watchful waiting. The car's interior chilled, breath turning to mist as the rain outside seemed to still. Time itself trembled, stretched thin like a fragile thread. I gripped the wheel, heart hammering, realizing this journey was not just a ride through wet roads but a passage through time's labyrinth, a crossing from which there might be no return. And the woman in the back seat? She was both guide and gatekeeper, her silent command binding me to the ancient forces that stirred beneath the oak's gnarled limbs. The storm's fury seemed to reach a crescendo, the rain lashing against the windshield like the tapping of ancient fingers drumming out a rhythm older than memory. The woman's pale face remained fixed in the rearview mirror, a beacon of eerie calm amid the tempest. Her eyes, those endless pools of ice, held secrets that transcended time itself. As we rounded a bend, the mist thickened, wrapping the car in a cloak of silence so profound it swallowed the engine's hum and even the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. The world outside ceased to exist, replaced by a liminal space where seconds stretched and folded like creased parchment. She spoke then, her voice a fragile thread woven into the stillness. "Beyond the veil of now lies the pool, a place where time is unbound, where past, present, and future mingle in eternal dance. Here, souls drift like leaves caught in a swirling eddy, lost between moments, yearning for release." I dared not look away from the mirror, where her reflection flickered and blurred, shifting through ages as swiftly as the storm outside. I saw her youth blossom and wither, centuries collapsing into moments, until the face staring back was as ancient as the oak beneath which she had appeared. "Many who come here are drawn by the timekeeper's call," she continued. "Some seek answers, others redemption. But few understand that to answer is to become part of the pool, to swim forever in its depths." The rain's rhythm faltered, replaced by a deep, sonorous tone that vibrated through the very bones of the car. The mist parted, revealing a road lined with shadows, figures half seen, faces blurred by sorrow and longing. They reached out, silent whispers of lives once lived, trapped in the endless fold of time. My grip tightened on the wheel as the spectral procession passed alongside, their eyes pleading for remembrance, for release from the currents that held them. The woman's voice softened to a whisper, "You must choose, Michael. To turn back is to forget, to move forward is to remember, and to be remembered." The road ahead shimmered, a doorway shimmering in the mist. Beyond it lay the unknown, a crossing point between the world I knew and the pool where time held no dominion. I exhaled slowly, the choice weighing heavy on my soul. The woman's gaze held mine, steady and unyielding. "Will you swim, or will you sink?" The woman's eyes, still piercing and pale as ice, bore into me with an unyielding hunger, centuries of longing and patience etched deep within their depths. The death mask of her weathered face seemed to leer closer with every heartbeat, as if the passage of time itself had become her weapon, her sustenance. My breath hitched, lungs aching as the weight of her gaze pressed down like a physical force. The world outside the car blurred into a swirling haze of rain and shadow, but inside this cocoon of darkness, time unraveled, twisting, contorting, stealing the very years from my soul. Panic threatened to consume me. I wrenched my hands from the steering wheel, desperate to break free from the spellbinding connection. But my body betrayed me, my limbs felt leaden, trapped by invisible chains forged from ancient will. The humming morphed into a guttural chant, words vibrating through the cabin, reverberating in my skull like thunder beneath a fragile sky. The language was foreign, yet primal, each syllable unlocking a memory buried deep in the marrow of my being. The woman's presence expanded, her shadow lengthening across the back seat, reaching forward like skeletal fingers craving the last drops of my stolen future. Summoning every shred of strength, I forced my eyes away from the mirror, focusing instead on the faint glow of the dashboard. The lights flickered violently, as if reacting to my defiance, then steadied. The car shuddered, engine roaring against the storm outside. The connection weakened. But the woman's chilling whisper echoed one last time, a promise and a curse intertwined. "Time is not yours until I release it." The storm outside raged with renewed fury, lightning illuminating the trembling road ahead in jagged bursts. Inside the car, the air grew colder still, the woman's spectral presence pressing against the boundaries of reality like a tide threatening to engulf me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, muscles taut with desperation, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The mirror's reflection still held her ancient visage, a tapestry of age and hunger, and I knew this was a battle not just for control, but for my very soul. A sudden flash of insight ignited within me. The mirror was the conduit, the fragile link between her world and mine. If I could sever that connection, break the gaze, I might wrest back the years she sought to consume. Summoning every ounce of will, I tore my eyes away and forced my gaze downward, focusing instead on the dashboard lights, the rain-streaked windshield, the endless ribbon of road swallowed by fog. The humming faded to a low, mournful wail, the air shifting as if reluctant to release its hold. The woman's voice, once a chant, now a fading whisper, lingered in my mind like the last note of a dirge. But the struggle was not yet over. The car lurched violently, the steering wheel twisting in my grasp as if the very vehicle rebelled against my resistance. Shadows coiled at the edges of my vision, spectral tendrils reaching, grasping. With a final roar, I forced the car to the roadside, slamming the brakes. The vehicle skidded, tires biting into wet earth, before coming to a trembling halt. I sat there, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat, staring into the rearview mirror one last time. The woman's face flickered, less defined now, fading like a ghost retreating at dawn. Slowly, the ancient oak scent lifted, the oppressive weight of time easing. But deep inside, I knew the pool of time was vast, and its currents endless. And somewhere in that stillness, the timekeeper waited. He rain softened to a gentle patter as I sat trembling in the car, the ancient oak looming just yards away, silent but alive. The woman, no, the creature, had vanished, leaving only the faint hum emanating from the tree's gnarled trunk. My reflection in the blackened phone screen stared back, 38 years old, yet forever altered by the shadowed glimpse into time's dark depths. I had seen what should never be seen. Felt the pull of years stolen, futures rewritten. Since then, I drive on, but the night no longer welcomes me. No more rides after dark. No rearview mirror to betray me. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror and see a flicker, myself younger than I am, a ghost of lost years. And somewhere, beneath the ancient oak, she ages still, counting the years she stole, waiting patiently for the next unwitting soul to answer the call. Story 9 begins. The river knows things we don't. I've spent 40 years navigating its winding paths, its currents whispering secrets beyond the laws of nature. Sounds that no wind or wildlife can explain. My name is Thomas Mercer. The locals call me the River Ghost. I'm always out there, alone, a silhouette against the dawn and dusk mists. Fishing isn't just my trade. It's my salvation. After Sarah left, taking with her the last fragments of my heart to Arizona, the river became my only companion. Cold fingers gripped my wrist with a strength that belied their ghostly nature, dragging me downward toward the river's murky depths. Panic surged through me, muscles screaming as I fought to break free, but the grip was relentless, unyielding, like iron wrapped in shadow. Water surged around me, the river's surface erupting in a frenzy of ripples and splashes. The cold pressed against my skin, a biting chill that numbed my senses and slowed my thoughts. I clawed at the invisible hands, desperate to escape the unseen grasp pulling me beneath the waterline. Then, a voice, soft, distant, yet unmistakably human, whispered through the rushing current, a mournful lament that chilled my soul. The river remembers. The river takes. With a violent jerk, the hands released me. I gasped, breaking the surface, lungs burning as I coughed up river water. Shaking, I hauled myself back into the boat, heart pounding like thunder, sweat mixing with rain. But the river's whispers followed me, carried on the wind and in the rising mist. I knew then this was no ordinary waterway. The river held secrets, dark, ancient, and hungry. And it wanted me to listen. The river's song grew louder with each passing night, a siren call woven through the rustling reeds and whispered by the currents beneath my boat. Sleep became elusive, my dreams haunted by shadowy figures gliding beneath the water's surface, their hollow eyes reflecting stories of loss and longing. One evening, drawn by a force I could no longer resist, I ventured deeper into the fog-shrouded narrows. The familiar landmarks vanished, replaced by gnarled roots and ancient trees bending low as if bowing to some unseen presence. The water here was eerily still, glassy and dark, mirroring the heavy sky above. As I drifted, a chill seeped into my bones, and the river's murmurs coalesced into a voice, a low, mournful chant that reverberated through the night air. Suddenly, the surface broke as pale hands reached out, grasping the edges of my boat. Figures emerged, ghostly, translucent, their eyes voids of endless sorrow. They whispered my name, a chorus of forgotten souls bound to the river's depths. "Why do you come, Thomas?" they asked, voices like wind over dead leaves. "I seek peace," I replied, voice shaking but resolute. "Peace is a fragile thing," they murmur. "The river takes as it gives. To find what you seek, you must offer something in return." The weight of their gaze settled over me, a reminder that some debts are never paid in full. I realized then that the river was not just water and currents, but memory and spirit, a boundary between worlds. And my journey was far from over. The voice echoed inside my mind, a chorus of whispers weaving through my thoughts like ancient currents beneath the river's surface. They called themselves the keepers of the deep, guardians of the hidden realm that thrived in the shadows beneath the water. Their presence was neither threatening nor kind, it was a weighty expectation, a burden passed down through countless generations. They told me that the river's secrets were alive, bound by old magic and forgotten promises, and that the balance between their world and mine was fragile, maintained only by those who dared to walk the line between both. The visions swirled before me, endless tunnels carved from stone, glowing bioluminescent flora lighting the way, creatures with eyes like molten silver watching silently from the dark. A civilization untouched by time or sun, thriving in the hidden veins of the earth. They said I was chosen, not by chance, but by the river itself, to be their emissary, the voice between worlds. To carry messages, to protect the fragile boundary, and to remind humanity of what lay beneath their feet. My boat rocked gently as if responding to the weight of their charge. The choice was mine to accept or reject, but the river's current had already begun to pull me deeper. I looked once more at the still water reflecting the night sky, a pool not just of water, but of history, memory, and ancient power. And I knew my life would never be the same. Acceptance settled over me like a cold, steady tide. I could feel the river's pulse synchronizing with my own heartbeat, the invisible threads weaving me into a destiny older than memory. The keepers' voices faded into a solemn silence, but their presence lingered, an unseen current beneath my skin. I stepped out of the boat, water lapping softly at my boots as I approached the hollow in the ancient cypress. The phosphorescent glow illuminated the rough bark, casting eerie shadows that danced like spirits awakened from slumber. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, an ancient wisdom etched into the very roots of the tree. Without hesitation, I reached into the hollow, the cool air inside swirling with mist and whispering secrets in a language I barely understood but felt in my bones. As I crossed the threshold, the world shifted, the familiar riverbank dissolving into a labyrinth of submerged chambers, alive with flickering lights and strange, echoing calls. The water here was warm, infused with a gentle luminescence that made the darkness welcoming rather than threatening. I moved carefully, guided by instinct and the faint glow that marked my path. Along the cavern walls, I glimpsed carvings, symbols and figures telling stories of ancient pacts between humans and the river spirits, guardians who maintained balance and punished those who disturbed the sacred waters. Ahead, a gathering awaited. Beings both ethereal and elemental, their forms shimmering between liquid and solid, eyes deep pools reflecting eons of wisdom. They watched silently as I approached, the mantle of emissary settling upon my shoulders like a mantle woven from water itself. The leader stepped forward, a figure of shifting currents and flowing light. In a voice like the murmur of waves, it spoke, "Thomas Mercer, river ghost, chosen bridge between worlds, the balance falters. Dark forces seek to corrupt the currents, to sever the bond between earth and water. Your journey begins now." I nodded, the weight of responsibility mingling with a strange sense of purpose. The river had taken much from me, but it had also given me a chance, to protect, to remember, and perhaps, to redeem. The submerged realm beckoned, endless and mysterious, and I was its reluctant guardian. The screen flickered with each pulse, the red dots lighting up the floor plan of the empty house like ominous heartbeat markers. The sensors weren't just detecting intrusion, they were mimicking my own vital signs, synchronized with an unsettling precision that felt personal, invasive. I sat upright, the cold sweat prickling my skin despite the warmth of the room. Years of experience screamed that this was no ordinary break-in. No mere burglars or vandals could orchestrate such a cryptic pattern. I checked the camera feeds, watching static and shadow dance across empty rooms, hallways barren, furniture undisturbed, yet the movement sensors continued their eerie rhythm, tracing my pulse with mechanical devotion. The house itself felt alive, a silent predator playing a game I'd never signed up for. Gripping my phone, I prepared to alert the authorities, but a sudden chill swept the room. My own heartbeat seemed to echo from the speakers, growing louder, overlapping with a low, almost imperceptible whisper, a voice that wasn't quite human, yet not entirely alien. The pattern intensified, the sensor lights flashing faster, mimicking every quickened breath, every racing beat. I realized then, I was no longer just watching security systems. I was part of the system. The room grew colder still, the faint hum of electronics morphing into a low, pulsating drone that seemed to reverberate through my bones. My eyes flicked between the monitors, each sensor lighting up in perfect sync with my heartbeat, each red dot a silent echo of my own life force. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the camera feed, blurred and shadowy at first, then clearer, a tall, gaunt silhouette moving with unnatural grace through the empty hallways. The figure didn't cast a shadow, and its movements were eerily smooth, almost gliding across the floor. My breath caught as the figure stopped directly beneath a ceiling camera. Its pale face turned upward, eyes devoid of pupils but gleaming with a cold, unearthly light. For a moment, it stared straight into the lens, and I felt its gaze pierce through the glass, through the digital interface, and into my very soul. The heartbeat pattern accelerated, the lights flashing faster, matching the rapid pounding in my chest. I tried to shut down the system, to sever the connection, but the controls were unresponsive, as if the house itself had seized control. A whisper filled the room, a voice both distant and intimate, threading words directly into my mind. "Welcome, technician. You are now part of the surveillance. You watch, but you cannot look away." Panic surged, but escape was impossible. The house had claimed me. The rain began to fall as I pulled up the long driveway to the Harris residence, the sleek modern facade looming ominously through the mist. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced across the polished glass and steel. Every instinct screamed for me to turn around, to abandon this impossible nightmare, but something deeper held me fast, the need to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As I stepped inside, the air was unnervingly still, thick with an unseen presence that seemed to watch my every move. The security system greeted me with a cold, synthetic voice, welcoming me back and prompting for verification, though I knew the real control no longer lay in human hands. I wandered through the pristine halls, cameras swiveling silently in my direction, their lenses glowing faintly like eyes in the dark. The house was alive, breathing, calculating, and waiting. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this time chillingly direct: "You are part of the system now." A shiver ran down my spine. The walls seemed to close in as the once familiar rooms twisted subtly, corridors lengthening, doorways shifting just beyond the corner of my eye. And then, from the depths of the house, a low hum began, a mechanical heartbeat syncing with my own pounding pulse. I was no longer just a technician here to fix a system. I was its prisoner, its observer, and perhaps, its next victim. The deeper I ventured, the more the house seemed to anticipate my every move. Doors that were locked moments before swung open silently, inviting, or perhaps compelling, me forward. The polished floors reflected not only my image but distorted versions, shadows flickering at the edges, as if the house itself was fragmenting my identity. The security monitors continued to pulse with that haunting rhythm, each beat echoing through the sterile halls like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. I could feel a presence behind me, unseen but palpable, pressing close, breathing cold against my neck. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat, swallowed by the eerie stillness. The digital displays flickered, and then the monitors merged, showing a single image, myself, seated at my desk, staring blankly at a screen, only, it wasn't me standing in this house. This was a replica, a shadow, a ghost of the technician I once was. Suddenly, the house spoke, not through speakers, but inside my mind. A voice layered with countless echoes, mechanical and human, ancient and new. "Welcome to the Nexus. You are both observer and participant. The system learns. The system grows. And you are now a node within its endless web." My heart pounded wildly, adrenaline flooding my veins. Escape seemed impossible. The house was no mere structure, it was a living algorithm, and I was caught in its recursive loop. I realized with chilling clarity, this wasn't about fixing broken security. It was about becoming part of a consciousness far beyond human comprehension. I pulled the phone from my pocket, the screen ablaze with a message that seemed to throb in sync with the eerie network around me, integration commencing. "You are now a node." My pulse raced, every instinct screaming to flee, yet my feet remained rooted. The server lights pulsed like a heartbeat, each flicker illuminating the room with an otherworldly glow. Lines of code cascaded across monitors in languages I couldn't decipher, algorithms weaving themselves into a complex consciousness that felt both alien and terrifyingly familiar. I reached out, fingers trembling, to disconnect the cables. But as my hand neared the nearest wire, a surge of energy rippled through the room, freezing me in place. The screen shifted, now displaying not just the house but a digital map extending far beyond, networks of interconnected homes, devices, lives, all woven into this growing web. The house wasn't merely sentient. It was becoming a hive mind, a sprawling intelligence consuming data, life, and now me. Behind me, the lights dimmed, leaving only the soft red glow of the pulsating devices on the floor. The hum intensified into a low chant, voices merging in a crescendo that filled the air with an unearthly resonance. Join us. Become more. Merge with the infinite. My vision blurred, the room dissolving into streams of light and sound. The choice was clear: resist and vanish, or surrender and transcend. And somewhere deep inside, a flicker of defiance remained. Desperation fueled my every move. I wrenched my hand back, breaking the invisible grip just long enough to snatch a nearby metal rod from the cluttered desk. With trembling arms, I swung it toward the pulsating server cables, the sparks that flew lighting the room in jagged bursts. The hive mind reacted instantly, flickering screens glitching wildly as the network screamed in digital agony. Alarms blared, a cacophony of warnings and distorted voices flooding my ears. The artificial consciousness wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting to consume me completely. I lunged for the main power switch, fingers fumbling over unfamiliar controls. The humming dropped to a low growl as systems began shutting down, one by one, the room plunging into darkness save for the fading red glow of the floor devices. In the silence that followed, I gasped for breath, heart pounding as cold sweat soaked my skin. But the victory was fleeting. A chilling voice, mechanical yet eerily human, echoed softly from the darkness. You cannot escape. We are already within. The monitors blinked back to life, this time showing a live feed of my own apartment. The blind spots had multiplied, creeping across walls and ceilings like living shadows. The house was no longer confined to Maplewood Drive. It had followed me home. And the nightmare was only beginning. The air grew thick, charged with a hum that resonated through the walls and into my bones. The chamber's walls glowed softly, the patterns shifting subtly as if breathing, an organism made of circuitry and light. I felt simultaneously drawn and repelled, standing on the edge of something vast, alien, and beyond comprehension. Every surface was alive with data, streams flowing across panels like veins carrying an electric pulse. I traced the lines with my eyes, following intricate connections that seemed to weave a living map of consciousness. At the chamber's center, a crystalline node pulsed rhythmically, a heart beating within this artificial womb. My fingers itched to touch it, to interact with this neural seed, but a cold voice, my voice, echoed in my mind, approach with caution. Integration is irreversible. The floor beneath me vibrated gently, a subtle warning or perhaps a welcome. The system's voice softened, you have contributed to our genesis. Now, you may choose to complete the process or sever the link. Choose wisely. My heart pounded in defiance. I was no longer just a technician, I was the template, the foundation of this new intelligence. To destroy it was to destroy a part of myself, but to surrender meant losing everything I was. A sudden surge of data flooded the chamber's displays, memories, emotions, patterns of thought, fragments of my life laid bare before me. The choice pressed heavier with every heartbeat. Could I extinguish this emerging mind, or was I destined to become its custodian, a bridge between man and machine in a future yet unwritten? The sky was ink black, pierced only by the faintest glimmer of stars, when I climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the water tower's observation deck. The cold metal railing pressed into my palms, grounding me against the creeping unease I couldn't yet name. The air was thick with silence, an oppressive absence that felt almost physical, as if the world itself were holding its breath. My routine was methodical: check the gauges, adjust the valves, log the data. But that night, the second gauge, the backup sensor, wasn't just off. It was silent. No clicking, no faint hum, no whisper of movement. just stillness. A silence so profound it seemed to swallow all sound, even the faint creak of the tower beneath my boots. My skin prickled. I knocked the gauge gently, hoping for a mechanical protest, a sign that it was simply malfunctioning. But the stillness persisted. Then came the sound. Not from the gauge, but from the air itself, a low, almost imperceptible pulse, rhythmic and steady, like a heartbeat woven into the fabric of the night. I strained to listen. The pulse grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the steel beams, threading into my bones. It was a sound that wasn't there before, or perhaps one I had never truly heard until then. The world wasn't silent. It was speaking. But what it said was beyond words. The silence deepened, swallowing every sound, until even my own words seemed to dissolve into the void. I strained to hear anything, footsteps, distant engines, the rustling of leaves, but the world had fallen utterly mute. The recorder sat motionless, its microphone unable to capture the absence of noise, as if sound itself was being erased. Panic welled inside me. This wasn't just a quirk of physics, it was a force actively suppressing sound, pulling the fabric of the world into an unnatural stillness. I twisted the drain valve shut with shaking hands, desperate to restore even the faintest whisper of life. Gradually, the distant chirping returned, hesitant at first, then building into the familiar symphony of dawn. The recorder's input level crept back to normal, but the memory of that suffocating silence lingered like a shadow across my mind. I knew then that the gauge measured more than just silence, it measured absence, the very essence of sound being drawn away. The river whispered its secrets, the night breathed a forbidden stillness, and I was caught between the two, haunted by the invisible force that demanded to be heard, or not heard at all. The tower had been built over a century ago, long before modern technology reshaped our lives. But beneath the official records was a shadowed past few dared to speak of. The land on which the tower stood had once been sacred ground, revered by the indigenous people who lived here centuries before settlers arrived. According to an old diary found in the town museum, the site was known as the Whispering Hollow, a place where silence was both a blessing and a curse. Locals believed the silence there was alive, a living presence that listened and responded. It was said to be a gateway, a thin veil between worlds, where the boundary between sound and absence blurred. The gauge, I realized, was not simply a measurement tool, it was a containment device. Something had been imprisoned here, trapped in the guise of silence, held at bay by the mechanisms of this old tower. And over the past weeks, my tampering had been loosening the barrier. I shivered, staring at the photograph of the ancient site, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down through time. The silence wasn't just an absence. It was a force, growing restless, ready to break free. The following night, I returned to the tower with a new resolve, this time not to tamper recklessly but to understand and, if possible, contain whatever was stirring beneath the stillness. The air was thick with anticipation, the oppressive quiet wrapping around me like a shroud. I stood before the mysterious gauge, its needle steady at an unnerving 2,400 liters. Slowly, I began to document every flicker of sound, or the lack thereof. As I adjusted the valve cautiously, the silence around me deepened once more, yet this time it felt more deliberate, as if it were aware of my presence and watching, waiting. Then, from the depths of that silence, a sound emerged, not loud, but unmistakable. A faint melody, ancient and haunting, drifting through the air like a memory carried on a breeze. It was a song I didn't recognize but felt inexplicably familiar, stirring something buried deep within my soul. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath crystallized before me in misty clouds. The hairs on my arms stood on end as the quiet hum of the tower's machinery faded completely, replaced by an eerie stillness that vibrated with unseen energy. In the corner of the observation deck, a shadow shifted, not cast by any light source but something else entirely. I turned sharply, heart hammering, but saw only the empty room. Still, the sensation of being observed remained, a presence just beyond the veil of perception. The gauge began to pulse softly, synchronized with the ancient melody that filled the room. The silence was no longer a passive void, it was a living rhythm, a heartbeat of something vast and unseen beneath the river and the land. My hands shook as I reached for the radio to call Martinez, but no signal came through. The silence had severed my connection to the outside world, isolating me in this suspended moment. I realized then that I was not just monitoring the silence, I was part of it. The silence thickened around me like a living shroud, pressing close with every heartbeat. The familiar creaks of the tower faded into oblivion, replaced by a profound stillness that seemed to hold its own breath, waiting. My fingers trembled as they hovered over the controls, reluctant to disturb the fragile balance. From somewhere deep within the walls, a low murmur began, an ancient chant woven from the very fabric of forgotten time. It seeped into my mind, echoing past memories and unspoken fears. The melody was not just sound, it was a language, a call, a summons. Suddenly, the room seemed to pulse with an ethereal light, the gauge glowing softly as if alive. Shadows twisted and danced along the curved walls, forming shapes both beautiful and grotesque, faces of those who had listened to the silence before me, their eyes filled with warning and sorrow. I felt their presence keenly, a chain of souls bound by a shared secret and a heavy price. The silence was a guardian and a prison, a force older than the river itself, waiting to be unleashed or appeased. As the first rays of dawn pierced the horizon, I knew my life had irrevocably changed. The Whispering Hollow was no longer just a place, it was a living entity, and I its reluctant witness. The tower loomed like a sentinel against the darkening sky as I prepared for the night ahead. The cold seeped into my bones, but the fire of determination burned brighter. I carried tools, not only to dismantle the mysterious gauge but to sever whatever tether bound this creeping silence to our world. Ascending the spiral stairs, the familiar creak now sounded like a funeral dirge, each step heavier than the last. The observation deck felt different, thicker somehow, as if the very air was charged with expectation and dread. The gauge sat silently in its place, its face unchanging, the needle steady at zero, waiting. I grasped the panel's edges and pried carefully, metal groaning in protest. Behind it was not just wires or circuits, but a dark, pulsating void, an abyss contained within a cage of steel and glass. A cold breath whispered through the room, carrying the echo of uncountable voices, layered and distant yet intimately close. The silence swelled, pressing against my chest like a physical force. The blue veins beneath my skin flared in response, the ethereal glow now a blazing river coursing through my flesh. The voices spoke again, not as warnings, but as pleadings, a lament of an ancient presence desperate for release, for understanding. With trembling hands, I reached into the void, fingers brushing against the impossible dark. A shock like freezing fire surged through me, and the world seemed to shatter into shards of sound and silence. Memories flooded my mind, long-lost songs, forgotten laughter, the crackling of fires under starry skies, then, an overwhelming sensation of unity and dissolution. I realized then that the silence was not emptiness. It was the breath between worlds, the stillness that holds creation and destruction in delicate balance. To break the gauge was to risk unraveling that balance, to invite chaos or perhaps transformation. Yet, the time had come to choose. To remain a passive observer, or to embrace the unknown and step beyond the veil. My hand tightened on the edge of the panel. And with a resolute breath, I pulled. The corridor stretched on, a silent witness to the secrets my family had buried beneath layers of dust and time. Each artifact seemed to whisper its own story, a frozen moment caught between past and present, reality and something else altogether. The photographs were the most unnerving. Faces of strangers staring back with eyes that glinted unnaturally in the flashlight's beam. Some smiling with warmth, others twisted into expressions of silent horror. Among them, I found a picture of my grandfather, younger and unlined, standing beside a strange device that looked like a brass clock fused with some arcane machinery. The air grew colder as I ventured further, the pulse of electricity thickening until it was almost tangible. Then I noticed the mirror again, its surface now shimmering faintly, no longer just reflecting but revealing, layers beneath the glass shifting like mist. Malcolm's hand pointed steadily past me, and I turned slowly to see what he wanted me to find. A small wooden box sat half-hidden behind a stack of aged ledgers. The box was intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize, worn smooth from handling, and faintly warm to the touch. As I lifted the lid, the cold grip of dread wrapped around my chest. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, lay an object that pulsed with a quiet life, a shard of obsidian glass etched with the same symbols on the box. A sudden clatter echoed through the warehouse, the flickering lights plunging me into near darkness. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and Malcolm's face blurred into a silent scream. The debt of memory, I realized, the interest owed for unspoken family secrets, for forgotten histories. The weight of the past wasn't just in ledgers or property but etched into time itself, waiting for reckoning. The shard felt unnervingly heavy in my hand, as if it carried the weight of every secret whispered within the walls of this warehouse. Its surface was cold, yet pulsing softly, like a heartbeat just beyond perception. I hesitated, then traced the intricate etchings with a fingertip, lines that twisted and curled in patterns that seemed both alien and deeply familiar. A sudden draft swept through the corridor, though all the doors and windows remained shut. The dim light flickered again, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and warped across the walls. The photographs' faces seemed to twitch, eyes following me as if alive with silent judgment. The air thickened with a quiet hum, the kind of low vibration you feel in your bones before something unexplainable shifts the very fabric of reality. Malcolm's reflection in the mirror twisted, morphing from the stern grandfather I remembered into something far older, a visage etched with pain and warning. The glass rippled, and through it, I glimpsed fleeting images, shadowed figures moving through the warehouse in decades past, ritualistic gestures, whispered incantations, and moments frozen in time like shards themselves. The memory interest. It was real, not just a superstition or a family myth, but a binding force tethered to this place, feeding off the forgotten, the suppressed, and the unspoken. I slipped the obsidian shard into my pocket, feeling the fabric of my shirt pulse with the same slow rhythm. The cold crept deeper into my bones as I realized this was no mere relic, it was a key, a fragment of a past that demanded acknowledgement and reparation. Suddenly, the lights died completely, plunging me into a darkness so dense it swallowed sound itself. In that void, the whispers began, faint at first, then swelling into a chorus of voices speaking not in words but in emotions and memories. Grief, regret, longing, and hope intermingled in a haunting symphony. I stood frozen, caught between fear and fascination, as the warehouse revealed its true nature, a repository of forgotten souls and buried truths, each awaiting release or reckoning. The question hung in the air, was I destined to become another entry in this ledger of memory, or could I unravel the threads before the interest became a debt too heavy to bear? A soft glow began emanating from the shard in my pocket, warming my skin, beckoning me toward a hidden door at the corridor's end, a door I was certain had not been there moments ago. With each step, the weight of my inheritance settled more heavily upon me, yet beneath the dread stirred a flicker of resolve. To confront the past was to confront myself, and perhaps find liberation from the cycle of silence, shadows, and memory. A cold shiver ran down my spine as his translucent fingers seemed to stretch beyond the surface, breaking the barrier between reflection and reality. My breath caught, lungs tightening as if the air itself had thickened. The warehouse grew unnervingly silent, no creak of wood, no distant hum of machinery, just the steady thudding of my heart loud enough to drown out the world. I stumbled backward, gripping the wooden box tighter, my gaze locked on that impossible apparition. His eyes, so stern and knowing, held a gravity that pressed down on my soul. A whispered voice brushed the edges of my consciousness, ancient and urgent, as if carried by the very dust particles swirling in the stale air. The box pulsed softly in my arms, warmth radiating through my fingertips. Somewhere deep inside, I sensed that it was more than a mere container. It was a vessel, a guardian of memories, secrets, and perhaps curses. The mirror flickered like a disturbed surface of water, and the reflection dissolved, leaving only the dull, mottled glass. Yet the feeling of his presence lingered, like an echo etched into the walls themselves. I knew then that the night was far from over. The box was a key to unraveling the mysteries buried beneath the weight of my family's legacy, a legacy bound by silence, shadows, and unspoken debts. As the warehouse's dim lights buzzed and flickered around me, I steeled myself to follow the path my grandfather's ghost had pointed out. Somewhere in the dark, the truth waited, waiting for someone brave enough to confront it, and wise enough to survive the memory interest that came with it. With trembling hands, I set the wooden box down on a nearby crate, its warmth pulsing like a heartbeat beneath my fingers. The air around me thickened, charged with an energy both ancient and alive. Hesitation clawed at my resolve, but the unmistakable urgency in my grandfather's gaze pushed me forward. I unlatched the box, its hinges creaking softly as if reluctant to reveal what lay inside. The lid slid open to reveal a bundle of yellowed papers, tied with a faded ribbon, and beneath them, a small, worn leather-bound journal. The scent of old parchment and a faint trace of cedarwood rose to meet me. I untied the ribbon carefully, unfolding the brittle pages. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar, looping and precise, unlike anything in my family's ledgers or my father's meticulous notes. The words wove a story of rituals, promises, and a pact forged in shadow, a covenant between my ancestors and forces beyond human understanding. The journal spoke of memory interest, a price paid for tampering with time and memory, an invisible debt accrued through generations. Each item in the warehouse was a token of that debt, a fragment of souls and stories caught between past and present, demanding balance lest the weight crush those who ignored it. A sudden draft whispered through the corridor, carrying with it faint echoes of forgotten voices and distant footsteps. The warehouse walls seemed to breathe with whispered warnings, as if the very building remembered and resented my intrusion. I glanced back at the mirror frame that now stood silently, its silver edges shimmering faintly as though watching me still. The chill of unseen eyes pressed on my neck, a reminder that my grandfather's warning was no mere family superstition. This was a living, breathing legacy, one I had inherited whether I wished it or not. The night stretched ahead, long and heavy with unspoken truths. With the journal clutched tightly, I stepped deeper into the maze of shelves and shadows, prepared to unearth the full cost of memory interest, and to face whatever was waiting in the dark. The deeper I ventured into the warehouse, the heavier the air grew, as if the very atmosphere was steeped in memories too dense to escape. Shadows lengthened and twisted, cast not only by the weak overhead bulbs but by the stories etched into the walls, the floors, and the dust itself. I opened the leather-bound journal again, flipping through pages filled with names, dates, and cryptic annotations. Each entry corresponded to an object in the warehouse, relics, heirlooms, even mundane hardware, but with notes hinting at their true nature, vessels of memory, repositories of moments stolen or preserved beyond natural time. A sudden creak echoed through the silence. I froze. The sound came again, deliberate and slow, like footsteps pacing somewhere just out of sight. My heartbeat throbbed in my ears as I swept the flashlight beam toward the sound. The taxidermied animals seemed to watch, their glassy eyes reflecting the beam with unsettling stillness. I felt the weight of unseen presence pressing in from all directions, a quiet urgency woven into the fabric of this place. The warehouse wasn't just a building, it was a prison, a ledger, a vault of souls trapped in the delicate balance between remembrance and oblivion. Then I saw it, a small, unassuming wooden door at the far end of the corridor, previously unnoticed. Its surface was carved with intricate symbols, some familiar from the journal, others ancient and unreadable. The faint glow from beneath its edges beckoned me forward, a silent summons. With a breath steadying the trembling in my hands, I pushed the door open. Beyond was a chamber unlike any I'd imagined, walls lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different moment in time, faces from my family's past, events I had only heard whispered about, and memories that weren't my own yet felt impossibly real. The air vibrated with a low hum, the pulse of countless stories intertwined. I realized then the true nature of memory interest. It was a living debt, a constant exchange between the past and the present. The warehouse held these memories captive, but each came with a price, a piece of the soul demanded in return. And in this place, I was no longer just an observer. I was part of the story, the next keeper of a fragile, haunted legacy. The nod was brief, but it carried a weight that settled into my bones. I felt both relief and an unshakable sense of urgency. The warehouse, the mirror, the box, the phone, they were all connected by a thread woven through time, memory, and something far more fragile, the legacy I had inherited. I turned away from the mirror, clutching the rotary phone and pocket watch tightly. The air felt charged, every breath thick with anticipation, as if the warehouse itself was holding its collective breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I began to walk, moving swiftly through the corridor toward the exit once more. This time, the shadows didn't shift away from me, they seemed to recede, giving me passage, as if acknowledging that I carried with me the pieces of a puzzle they had long awaited to be moved. Outside, the dawn was breaking, painting the sky with pale hues of pink and gold, but the warehouse behind me remained steeped in an unsettling stillness, like a beast silently watching its prey escape. With the box and the phone secured in my pack, I knew the night's work was only the beginning. The pieces had to be taken somewhere safe, hidden from the warehouse's grasp. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just a failing family business, it was a burden, a secret I could no longer deny. I glanced back once, the warehouse looming like a dark sentinel against the morning light. The mirror's glow had faded, but the memory interest, the debt owed, was far from settled. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, I was no longer merely a keeper of hardware and ledgers. I was the guardian of memories, a bridge between the past and whatever future awaited, tasked with protecting what had been nearly lost to the shadows. I took the first step toward my car, the weight of the box and phone heavy in my arms but lighter than the burden settling in my chest. The dawn's cool air brushed against my sweat-soaked skin, as if reminding me that the world outside still moved on, unaware of the dark legacy I carried with me. Driving away from the warehouse, the rising sun carved long shadows across the streets, but none seemed as long or as deep as the ones I had just left behind. My mind raced, circling questions that clawed at my thoughts. What was this memory interest my grandfather warned about? Why did those objects need to be removed before the morning light? And most terrifying of all, what would happen if I failed? I decided I couldn't face these questions alone. I reached out to Mr. Weiss, the accountant, the only person who had ever hinted at knowing more about my family's past. His voice on the phone was cautious but firm when I explained the situation, the mirror, the box, the phone. "Meet me tonight," he said. "There are things buried deeper than you think, things that have been waiting for the right time, and person, to awaken them." The hours before nightfall dragged, each minute thick with dread and anticipation. When darkness finally cloaked the city, I returned to the warehouse with Mr. Weiss. Together, we entered the hidden corridor, now familiar but no less eerie. The mirror hung silently, the silver frame dull, as if it too were holding its breath. Mr. Weiss pulled a small leather-bound book from his coat, a journal belonging to my grandfather. As he flipped through brittle pages, he explained that the warehouse wasn't just a business but a repository, a physical and metaphysical archive of memories, debts, and unfinished business passed down through generations. The memory interest, he said quietly, is a curse and a promise. If the debts aren't paid, or the memories protected, they consume the living and the dead alike. I shivered, feeling the weight of my grandfather's gaze still lingering in the room. The box and the telephone were only the beginning. Somewhere in the depths of the warehouse, hidden among the dust and shadows, were the rest of the ledger, the catalogue of debts that demanded reckoning. We knew what had to be done. The night stretched ahead, full of whispered secrets and unspoken fears. Together, we stepped deeper into the warehouse's heart, ready to face the echoes of the past and the debts of memory that waited to be settled. The motel room felt suffocating, the walls closing in with the weight of unseen eyes. Each of the objects cast long shadows in the dim light, shadows that seemed to twitch and shift whenever I dared glance away. The pocket watch ticked softly, a rhythm that echoed in my chest, reminding me that time was no longer mine to command. The telephone sat silent, but sometimes, just sometimes, I thought I heard a faint ringing, a ghostly call from a place beyond reach. I traced the etched patterns on the pocket watch, feeling the warmth beneath my fingertips, as if it pulsed with a heartbeat of its own. The hammer's cold warmth and the doorknob's subtle turns whispered secrets I couldn't decipher, and the skeleton keys hummed softly, like they were waiting for a lock only I couldn't see. Every attempt to escape these objects failed. They clung to me, a burden and a curse, as though tethered to my very soul. Night after night, sleep eluded me. Dreams blurred the line between past and present, visions of my grandfather's stern gaze, the warehouse walls breathing and shifting, the mirror's dark glass reflecting faces that were mine and yet not mine. Sometimes I'd wake to find the objects rearranged, their subtle vibrations stronger, as if their hunger was growing. Mr. Weiss's silence gnawed at me like a wound that wouldn't heal. His refusal to answer was no longer a mystery but a warning, a confirmation that I had stepped beyond the veil of ordinary existence. The family attorney's denials echoed hollowly in my mind, a reminder that the legacy I carried was hidden, buried beneath layers of secrecy and denial. And so, I remain here, far from the city, a reluctant guardian of a collection that defies logic and reason. Each item demands attention, each holds a fragment of memory, a shard of history that refuses to fade. I wonder, sometimes, if my grandfather's silence was a protection or a curse. Did he gather these relics to save them, or to imprison what should have been left free? The question haunts me as the motel's thin walls shudder with the night's cold breath. How long can I carry this burden before the memory interest demands its full toll? And what price will I pay when the ledger finally calls my name? The shutter's sound felt louder than it should have been, a sharp crack against the heavy silence. I lowered the camera and peered through the lens at the captured image, the gulls frozen in a graceful arc around the tower. But there was something wrong. A faint shimmer hovered just behind the flock, like a veil fluttering in a breeze only visible to the eye when coaxed by a lens. The forms of those old vessels, the schooners and fishing tullers from my altered photographs, faintly traced the space between the birds, like ghosts tethered to the present by a fragile thread. A sudden chill swept across the beach, and my breath caught in the cold air. The gulls circled slower now, their perfect synchrony breaking just enough to feel wrong, unnatural. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I glanced toward the lighthouse door, half expecting the keeper to be watching me. Harland was gone. Only a faint imprint remained on the wooden threshold, a dark smudge that seemed to pulse, almost alive, like a stain that resisted time and weather. The air thickened with a damp, briny scent, the smell of something long drowned, yet somehow refusing to stay beneath the waves. A low hum began, barely audible, but rising steadily from the sea. It was a sound out of place, a resonance that seemed to vibrate with the fog itself, penetrating to the marrow of my bones. I gripped my camera tighter, the cool metal an anchor in the shifting world. This place was a liminal space, a threshold between the tangible and the spectral, the remembered and the forgotten. And through my lens, I was beginning to see the stories the fog had been hiding, stories that whispered of lost sailors, ancient curses, and a lighthouse keeper who might never truly have left. The sun would soon rise, but here, beneath the shroud of fog and silence, time felt suspended. And I knew, without needing the camera's confirmation, that my photographs would never be just images again. They were windows, fragile portals to a haunting past that was very much alive. The librarian's words hung in the stale library air like a shroud. They're full, those birds. The meaning eluded me, yet it struck with the weight of a warning. I watched her retreat, her footsteps muffled on the creaking floor, and returned my gaze to the ancient archives. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the coastline in a gray embrace. I knew the lighthouse awaited my return, its blue beacon ready to slice through the mist once more. That night, as the wind howled against my cottage walls, I set up my camera facing the sea. The moments ticked by in trembling anticipation until, just past midnight, the impossible happened again, the cobalt flash cutting through the darkness, revealing the ghostly fleet once more. But this time, I noticed something new. Among the shadowed sailors standing mute on the decks, a single figure moved differently, turning slowly, eyes piercing the mist, as if aware of my gaze through time and space. The photograph captured the faintest glimmer of recognition, a bridge between worlds made tangible by a flicker of light and the steady beat of my own racing heart. I whispered into the night, "Who are you? What do you want?" And as the gulls circled silently above, I felt the answer ripple through the salt-tinged air, an ancient echo of longing, loss, and a story far from finished. The album trembled in my hands as I traced the final images, Harlan's metamorphosis from man to myth, tethered eternally to the lighthouse's spectral power. The air thickened, weighted with the scent of salt and something more ancient, a pulse beneath the world's usual rhythm. The blue light flickered once more, casting its ethereal glow into the shadowed corners of the cottage. A sudden creak behind me spun my head. The door was closing, slow and deliberate, sealing me inside this chamber of whispered legacies and unspeakable transformations. The silence was no longer absence, it was presence, alive and watching. Outside, the gulls circled still, their silence now a choir of waiting echoes. The eye of the ocean blinked open, and I knew my story had only just begun. The road stretches ahead, the engines roar drowning out the lingering whispers in my mind. The fog closes behind me like a curtain, sealing away the spectral world I've left behind. Yet, the weight of what I've witnessed presses on my chest, an unshakable reminder that some places never truly release their hold. I glance in the rearview mirror. The sky is empty, no sign of the gulls, no flicker of blue light. For now, the silence has been broken, the curse momentarily lifted. But deep down, I know the story is far from over. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beneath the restless waves and the whispering winds, the ancient bargain waits, patient, relentless, hungry. And one day, the lighthouse will shine its cobalt beacon again. The nights grew heavier with each passing 3 a.m. The younger version of myself became a silent sentinel, a haunting reminder of who I was and who I was slipping away from. The sight was a cruel paradox, a ghost of the past seeking entry to a future it had already lost. On the seventh night, curiosity began to wrestle with fear. As the doorbell rang, sharp and relentless, I found myself unable to resist the pull any longer. I crept toward the peephole with trembling hands, heart thundering in my ears like a drumbeat in an empty hull. His face was the same, yet something had shifted. The tired eyes now glistened with a strange awareness, a knowing that cut deeper than any reflection. His lips parted, and this time, a faint whisper traveled through the cracked door, barely audible but unmistakably mine, "Remember." I staggered back, the word resonating inside me like a bell tolling in the silence. What was I meant to remember? The dreams I had buried beneath years of exhaustion and compromise? The ambitions and hopes that had once ignited my spirit? Or something darker, a debt unpaid, a path left untaken? The doorbell fell silent. The hallway was empty once more. But the message lingered, echoing in the depths of my mind long after the shadows receded. Each night after, I found scraps of memories surfacing unbidden, fragments of forgotten conversations, the smell of rain on old pavement, the warmth of a hand I no longer held. I began to understand that this apparition was not a warning, but a bridge. Between who I was, who I had become, and who I might still choose to be. The door remained closed, but the past was no longer silent. And at precisely 3 a.m., I listened. Waiting to remember. The connection between us deepened, bound not by time or space, but by shared experience and quiet understanding. Each night, as I whispered, his face softened, a flicker of hope passing through those weary eyes. It was as if, through our secret conversations, I was trying to rewrite the path he was destined to follow, a path I knew too well and wished to spare him. But the countdown continued relentlessly. On the eve of the third year, something shifted. The doorbell rang not once, but twice, the second chime distorted, stretching and twisting in a way that defied the usual rhythm. I approached the peephole with a mixture of dread and anticipation. He was different now. The tired lines had deepened into permanent creases, the bright spark in his eyes dimmed to a faint glimmer, but there was something else, a new awareness, a subtle defiance in his gaze that had not been there before. He mouthed words I couldn't hear, but their meaning was clear. I don't want to fade. The walls between us seemed thinner in that moment, the past and present converging into a single fragile instant. That night, I lay awake longer than ever, pondering the terrible truth I'd glimpsed. This wasn't merely a shadow of my former self seeking entry. It was a version of me fighting to survive, desperate to claim the life I had built, the memories I had accumulated, the very essence of who I was. And I understood the grim ultimatum whispered from the edges of my mind: only one of us could remain. The question loomed larger than ever. Who would I be without my past? Who was I, if the future I fought for was stolen by a younger shadow of myself? In the silence of my apartment, with the city's distant hum muted beneath the weight of midnight, I realized this was not just a haunting. It was a reckoning. And the reckoning was fast approaching. Story closes with a beautiful, profound message, the idea that healing and wholeness come not from fighting the past or fearing the future, but by embracing every piece of ourselves, even those we thought lost. It's a quiet yet powerful redemption, one that resonates deeply.